Soren proclaimed, still looking around the crowd. What? Ezran looked back and forth between them. I know. Soren grimaced. Annabelle is going to kill me. Not if Rayla doesn't kill you first. Ezran added unhelpfully. Okay, everyone, search the market for Shio and Fionn. Ezran turned to the guards. Your Highness, what about your protection? One guard asked, concern evident on her face. I'll be fine with Soren. Ezran held up a hand. The children are more important. Hurry. He didn't wait for an answer from the guard, turning back to Ethery and Soren. Where have you looked? Around this food section. Ethery gestured behind him, as Soren appeared to be growing increasingly hysterical. Are there any birds or mice you could talk to? Soren asked Ezran, hopping up on a table and scanning the crowd, much to the clear annoyance of the elf selling wares from the stall behind it. It would probably make more sense for me to help you guys. Ezran looked at Ethery. I agree. Ethery took a deep breath against the anxiety clawing at his throat. Why don't we split up again and search a wider area? Rayla sipped her GLGG, basking in the gentle warmth of the bonfire and relaxing in the ambience of the market. A trio of musicians played close to the fire, one of them singing softly. A few brave couples were dancing to the tune, their cheeks red and steps a little clumsy. It was an incredibly pleasant way to spend an evening. Do you think it's been 10 minutes yet? Rayla asked, reclined against Callum. Maybe. He sighed, squeezing her a little tighter. We could wander back and check. I guess. Rayla sat up straighter, finishing her festive drink, now a little cooler than she preferred, though still delicious. Callum grinned, narrowing his eyes at her. You miss Shio. He poked her in the side. Rayla wrinkled her nose, poking him back. Maybe, but so do you. Callum laughed openly, wrapping an arm around her waist and pulling her close against him. I do, and I'm not afraid to admit it, like some people. Rayla rolled her eyes, slipping an arm around his back. We're supposed to be making the most of grown-up time. This is not my preferred method of making the most of grown-up time. Callum teased, laughing when Rayla ruffled his hair. You know it's generally considered a good thing when you like your child, right? He leaned forward, kissing her softly. Yeah, but we should be able to go 20 minutes without seeing her. Rayla stroked his jaw. Well, she should work on being less cute then. Ethery raced around the market, his eyes scanning the areas around knee-height for any sign of Shio. Every childish giggle caught his ear, every red had his eye. Too quickly, he found himself back at the beginning of his search. Ezran and Soren were already there, the king appearing to try to console Soren. No luck then? Ethery asked, his stomach in knots. Ezran shook his head, his eyes darting back and forth between Soren and the crowd. What are we going to do? Soren looked around frantically. What if they've been kidnapped? They're both a million times cuter than any of these other dumb kids. He ranted, glaring at the various children near him with the audacity to refuse to be Fionn or Shio. Corvus! Soren screamed, pushing past Ethery and Ezran and racing across the market. Ethery followed him, noticing Corvus and Opalai trying to duck away from Soren's hot pursuit. Corvus! Opalai! Stop! Soren screamed and the two seemed to recognize defeat. They gave up hurrying away and turned to face Soren. Yes, Soren. Corvus sighed, sounding unimpressed. The kids, gone. Soren bent over, gasping for breath after his sudden sprint. Missing. Help, tracker. He pointed aggressively at Corvus. Corvus looked utterly confused, glancing at Opalai, and then Ezran and Ethery as they caught up. My king. Corvus looked to Ezran for guidance. Shio and Fionn snuck away from us. He explained. We've been searching for them but with no luck. Corvus and Opalai's unimpressed demeanor instantly changed, both of them beginning to scan the crowd too. How long have they been missing? Opalai asked as she looked around. Hours. Soren seemed on the verge of tears. Maybe 15 minutes. Ethery corrected. But it feels like hours. He added when Soren looked hurt. All right, let's split up. Corvus took charge. Was there anything that caught their eye in particular? You're going to help us track them? Soren took Corvus by the hands, appearing more than a little overwhelmed. I don't think I can do much tracking here, but we'll help you look, he replied, trying to pull his hands from Soren's. They both seemed to really like the puppets. Ethery elected to answer Corvus' original question. Okay, let's spread out and search while making our way to the puppet show. It's by the main entrance, correct? Corvus began walking backwards away from Soren. Yes. Ethery called out as he began to hurry down a row of stalls. Once again, he looked around for any sign of the children. All too soon he found himself back at the puppet show, again full of happy children. He ran to the front, scanning all the faces, his stomach dropping as none appeared to be Shio and Fionn. Looking up, he saw Ezran approach first, the various people present giving him strange looks, though Ezran paid them no mind. From another direction he saw Soren approaching, his face pale almost beyond recognition. No sign of them? Soren asked, panic evident on his voice. No. Ethery spoke softly, his mind a tangled mess. What to do now? Soren sunk to his knees, paying no mind to the dirty melted snow. Oh no. Oh no no no. What are we going to do? I'll be killed. Ethery and Ezran knelt by him, Ezran putting a calming hand on his shoulder. No luck, I suppose. Corvus joined them, Opalai appearing out of the crowd just after. Ethery shook his head. Perhaps we should start looking for Callum and Rayla. Opalai offered. Callum could search from the air and Rayla could probably cover a lot of ground if she were to scout from the stall roofs. Ethery sighed, it was a good suggestion, but he was not looking forward to telling Rayla and Callum he had lost their daughter. He exhaled, running a hand over his face when something caught his eye. Dropping to his hands and knees on the cobblestone floor, he peered into a small wooden building. A number had been set up in the children's section of the market as a sort of diorama series, depicting various scenes from Catullus history. This one portrayed Zym meeting his mother for the first time, a tiny wooden dragon nuzzling the head of a much larger dragon, though still nowhere near scale, Ethery noted. Looking entirely out of place in the tranquil scene was a bright red hat. Ethery crawled towards the cubby house, intent on investigating. Lying back against the large dragon, was Fionn with Shio curled up in his lap. Both appeared to be sleeping soundly, Shio sucking idly on her thumb. Soren. He called out, looking back to find Ezran and Soren watching him intently. They're here. He yelled manically, crawling right up to the little building. Soren crawled after him, though Ezran got to his feet and ran. Confirming they had indeed found the children, Soren began to laugh almost hysterically. He grabbed Ethery in a hug, gripping him tightly. Thank you. He gasped. Thank you so much. He sat back, eyes wide as he looked pleadingly at Ethery. Please don't ever tell my wife. Ethery chuckled before he realized Soren was serious. I'm sure she'll forgive you, Soren. No. She won't. Ever. He grabbed Ethery by the hands. She will hold this over me forever. He seemed to mull things over. And do you really want to tell Rayla? Ethery winced, not looking forward to that conversation. We can hardly keep it from them. Ezran, Opalai, Corvus and all the Kingsguard know. It's best to be honest, Soren. What about all that Moonshadow stuff about white lies and illusions? Soren asked hopefully. Ethery raised an eyebrow. I'm not sure this qualifies as a white lie. Soren sighed, shoulders slumping. You're right, I suppose, but tomorrow. He looked hopefully at the older elf. Ethery exhaled softly, seeing some of the merit on holding off. What are you doing? He and Soren looked up to find Rayla and Callum grinning at them. They were both loaded up with gifts and parcels, an impressive feat considering they had not been gone long. Soren's face somehow managed to drop even more. He looked horrified at Rayla and Callum, then at the sleeping children. Ah, kids, sleeping. He pointed at the cozy scene. Rayla raised an eyebrow at his unusual antics, then bent down to look at where he had pointed. Callum carefully placed his parcels on the ground and followed suit. Or. Rayla smiled softly as she focused on the sleeping children. Callum rested a hand on her shoulder as he peered inside to get a look. He inhaled sharply, his face positively melting. Oh, okay. That's the cutest. He grinned at Soren, then frowned in confusion. You okay, Soren? Yeah, I'm just worried about how hard it's going to be to get Fionn to sleep tonight now he's had a late nap. Soren looked at Ethery, who nodded softly, silently agreeing to leave the truth until the morning. Oh, good point. Rayla shuffled forward, appearing to assess how best to extract the children from their cozy nest. Have they been napping long? Not too long. Ethery answered non-committedly. Well, maybe she'll stay sleeping. Rayla said optimistically. It's way past her bedtime. She shuffled forward and gently extracted Shio from Fionn's arms. Shio barely reacted beyond yawning as Rayla passed her to Callum. The sleepy toddler settled against Callum's shoulder, one arm swinging lazily by her side. See, exhausted. Rayla smiled, adjusting Shio's hat slightly. Soren knelt by Rayla, heaving Fionn onto his own shoulder. The slightly older boy stirred a little, looking around blearily. Hi Dada. He mumbled quietly. Hey kiddo. Soren smiled softly at him, taking Ethery's offered hand and standing up. Sorry we snuck away. Fionn mumbled, his eyes closed. Shio wanted to see the puppets again. Shush. Soren rubbed his back, eyes darting between Callum and Rayla. We got really scared when we couldn't find you. Fionn yawned loudly. But we knew ZYM would take care of us. Callum and Rayla both narrowed their eyes, identical expressions passing over their faces as they listened intently to Fionn. Okay, what happened? Callum hissed, a hand over Shio's ear as he scowled at Soren. Soren sighed, shaking his head in defeat. Fionn, I cannot believe you ratted me out. // Fuel the pyre. Zuppy. Summary. For almost a decade now, life has been peaceful for the royal family of Katolis. All-out war is becoming a distant memory as efforts to unite the continent continue. Open borders let more than friends in, however, and whispers of dangers lurking in the shadows are growing louder and more insistent. Callum, Rayla and their adopted daughter Shio have been trying to ignore the growing unease as best they can, but when the threat comes banging at their door, they can no longer turn a blind eye. Notes. Hello readers, new and old. So, I have been tapping away at this fic since probably midway through 2020, which shocked me immensely when I went to check the series this morning. I stalled on it mostly because dealing with Moomf being decoined was a whole plot point I felt I needed to write. Don't know why now, but past me was a silly sausage. Present me is too, but not in this particular way, but season 4 essentially has me chill with them getting decoined sooner rather than later, and so I just plowed ahead with that assumption, and here is the fic. For those of you new to this series, it's not essential you read the other works, or I don't think it is, but it would likely give you a more in-depth understanding of the particular family dynamic I've set up. I have tried to tag the main areas I believe may upset /squick/ trigger people, but as I never feel confident that I've covered all my bases, if you would like to know more /ask about specific plot points, you can message me on my Tumblr, and I will do my best to accommodate you. I can also be found on Instagram and Twitter, but I'm rarely on either, so it will likely take me longer to respond. Thanks for taking a chance on this one. I will be updating weekly on a Wednesday. This fic is complete, so barring anything really out there, it should update on schedule. And yes, the title is from a song. I've done it. Finally. See the end of the work for more notes. Chapter 1. Notes. Hello readers, new and old. So, I have been tapping away at this fic since probably midway through 2020, which shocked me immensely when I went to check the series this morning. I stalled on it mostly because dealing with Moomf being decoined was a whole plot point I felt I needed to write. Don't know why now, but past me was a silly sausage. Present me is too, but not in this particular way, but season 4 essentially has me chill with them getting decoined sooner rather than later, and so I just plowed ahead with that assumption, and here is the fic. For those of you new to this series, it's not essential you read the other works, or I don't think it is, but it would likely give you a more in-depth understanding of the particular family dynamic I've set up. I have tried to tag the main areas I believe may upset /squick/ trigger people, but as I never feel confident that I've covered all my bases, if you would like to know more /ask about specific plot points, you can message me on my Tumblr, and I will do my best to accommodate you. I can also be found on Instagram and Twitter, but I'm rarely on either, so it will likely take me longer to respond. Thanks for taking a chance on this one. I will be updating weekly on a Wednesday. This fic is complete, so barring anything really out there, it should update on schedule. And yes, the title is from a song. I've done it. Finally. See the end of the chapter for more notes. Chapter text. Rayla glanced at the sun as she passed under the portcullis and into the castle proper. Though hidden by cloud, she could see from its high position that it was close to midday. She hoped Shio wasn't napping by now. She'd been gradually needing less and less midday naps, but they still happened more often than not. Of course, she could wait until her daughter woke up, but she hoped she didn't need to. 2 weeks seemed far too long to be away. It was unusual for her to go alone too. Usually, Callum and Shio would accompany her. Solo missions were more Callum's burden, but the rebuilding of a Moonshadow community at the Nexus required her attention and Callum was needed to discuss a treaty at Katolis. And so, she went alone. It was the longest she'd been away from Shio since she came into their lives and there were moments where she physically ached from wanting to see her. With her parents moving to the Nexus, perhaps she could bring Shio along when next she needed to spend such a long time there. It would be nice for Shio to spend extended time with her grandparents and get a little more immersed in Rayla's culture. Though she was pretty sure Callum would pout at the suggestion, not wanting to be away from their daughter either. Or maybe 2 weeks solo parenting would make the prospect more palatable. Making her way to the stables, Rayla looked around for a guard or servant who might know where Callum and her daughter were. Her shadow paw instinctively turned towards the stalls when Rayla heard a sustained squealing that could only be her little girl. She looked in the direction of the noise just in time to see Shio tear around the corner on unsteady legs, Callum desperately running after her, bent over comically with outstretched arms. Shio stopped suddenly, her eyes on Rayla. She mouthed something Rayla knew was Mama, then took off running once again. Rayla winced, leaping from her shadow paw and running as quickly as possible to intercept her daughter. Shio was quick, sometimes a little too quick, if the various cuts and bruises on her knees and elbows were anything to go by. She met her daughter with a grin, lifting her effortless into the air and swinging her around. "Hello, gorgeous." She pulled Shio into her arms, something that was becoming, well, not a struggle but noticeably requiring more effort of late. Sighing happily, Rayla cuddled her daughter's little body tight. "Hello Mama." Shio wrapped her little arms around Rayla's neck, squeezing her clumsily. "I miss you." "I miss you too, sweetheart." Rayla bounced Shio on her hip, looking over her shoulder to Callum approaching, a happy smile on his face too. "Hi." She smiled, reaching for him with her free hand. "Hi." Callum squeezed her fingers, then stepped closer to her, wrapping his arms around her and Shio and hugging them both. "Nice to have you back." He pressed his forehead against hers for a moment, then leaned forward and kissed her. "Yucky." Shio blew a raspberry, huffing loudly. Callum snorted, looking between Rayla and Shio. "Yucky." Shio pouted, wrinkling her nose at them and looking thoroughly unimpressed. "It's not yucky to kiss my two favorite girls in the whole world." Callum made a goofy face at Shio, moving to kiss her cheek. She giggled excitedly, pushing at his face. "Yucky, da-da." "Nope, can't stop me." Callum took Shio from Rayla, making exaggerated attempts to kiss her cheek. "I love you the most in the whole world and I have to kiss you." Shio snickered, looking at him like he was utterly ridiculous. "I love you in the whole world too, da-da." Callum snorted, shrugging. "Well, that's pretty close." Shio turned and pointed at the shadow paw, waiting patiently behind them. "Io." She looked at Callum first, then Rayla, clearly doing her best to look sweet and adorable. Rolling his eyes, Callum turned, and they began to walk towards the shadow paw. "Oh yeah, do you love me or is this all a ploy?" Rayla grinned, bumping him with her hip. "I think we both know the answer to that one." Snorting, Callum lifted Shio onto Io's saddle, hands loosely around her waist once she was settled. Leaning forward, Shio grabbed the reins and began to play at riding the beast. Smiling at her, Callum looked between Shio and Rayla. So, how was the trip? Fine. Rayla rested her hand on his where he was supporting Shio's back. More people moved in this time. Luyan had to allocate a building for a school, but Alan's drawing up plans to build a proper one. Really? Callum looked excited. A school. So, kids moving there. That's usually who they open schools for. Rayla snorted. Still, that's great. Callum continued enthusiastically. It feels like a proper community if there's kids and a school. Yeah, Rayla couldn't help but smile back. It had been weird seeing Moonshadow kids at the Nexus, but a good kind of weird. Even though the ghosting had been lifted on her and her parents, the Silver Grove never felt like home to her after what happened. This new community at the Moon Nexus was starting to feel that way though. Or rather, a familiar place that reminded her of home. Initially, she hadn't particularly enjoyed going to the Moon Nexus. Even years later, after wounds had healed and she and Callum had grown back together, it felt like a shadow always fell over the place. It had changed so much in recent years though, feeling like new, more vibrant. It was predominantly populated by Moonshadow elves, but she had seen some humans coming and going. Seeing children playing and merchants setting up shop, it felt like a true community was establishing itself. How's your parents' house coming along? Callum asked, interrupting her wandering thoughts. It's pretty much done. Rayla shrugged. They've packed up their stuff at the Silver Grove and are making their way here. Or the Nexus, I suppose. They wrote that Ethery and Ranan are going to make the trip with them and stay for a few weeks, so I guess we'll need to visit. Callum nodded, eyes leaving hers as he focused on Shio. You don't have to come. Rayla sighed. It had been years now, over a decade, and things were still tense between Callum and Ranan. They didn't exactly fight, and she never expected them to be in any way close, but the weirdness certainly made things awkward for everyone. Of course, I'll come. Callum replied tersely. I don't want to be away from you for weeks. Not so soon after this trip. Rayla sighed, but he continued. Anyway, things are fine. It'll be nice for Shio to have at least one set of grandparents so close by. He smiled at her, clearly trying to ease the tension. True, Rayla sighed, eyes drifting towards a guard clearly walking towards them. She nodded over Callum's shoulder, trying to direct his attention. Callum looked over his shoulder, frowning once he realized what was happening. The guard stopped a few feet from them, standing to attention. Worrying news from the border villages, Your Highnesses. Her eyes drifted to Shio, clearly moving to take in her slightly pointed ears and the little horns pointing out for her mess of curls. Callum glanced back to where he held Shio on the shadow paw. She was mumbling happily to herself, pulling and slapping the reins as Io leaned into Rayla's hand and she gently stroked his face. Sighing, he exchanged a look with Rayla. He was clearly trying to keep his response measured, numerous years spent under Opalai's instruction saw to that. These days his temper was less likely to flare, especially not at servants or guards. Diplomats or other people on a similar status to him were often fair game, but he now understood where there was a large power imbalance. Still, she didn't miss the slight pulling on his lips, a hint of a frown. It was generally expected that they weren't interrupted while playing with their daughter. A guard standing to the side would be noticed by one of them and any message could be conveyed to whichever of them wandered over. We'll attend to the scroll when we're done here. Callum obviously tried to keep the irritation from his voice, but Rayla could hear the impatient tone. Thank you, he added, seemingly as an afterthought. Rayla didn't recognize this guard. Perhaps she was new and didn't know the unspoken protocol. Begging your pardon, Highness, it's not a scroll. The young guard fidgeted, having clearly sensed she was annoying Callum. It's villagers. Villagers. Callum's interest was piqued, and Rayla wordlessly took over holding Shio as Callum turned to give the guard his full attention. What's brought them all the way from the border? Dark mags, they say, Highness. The guard looked concerned, gripping her pike tightly. Dark mags that have been taking people away. She hesitated for a moment. Taking the halflings. Callum started, eyes finding Rayla's. She reached for Shio, pulling her into her arms, a heavy feeling settling in her stomach. She felt her pulse begin to race, her mind awash with thoughts of dark mags and whatever they might want with halflings. Where are these villagers? Callum turned to the guard, giving her his full attention. High Cleric Opali suggested they wait in the throne room. The guard gestured behind her. The king is aware. Callum began walking in the direction of the castle as Rayla looked around briefly and smiled quickly when an elderly stable hand hurried over to take her shadow paw. Callum looked over his shoulder as she hurried to catch up with him. Yes, the king gave them an audience as soon as they arrived, the guard continued. His Majesty sent us looking for you as soon as he judged the threat was real. Callum frowned, exchanging a look with Rayla as he stepped a little closer to her. Thank you. We can find our way from here. He dismissed the guard, waiting until she was out of earshot before turning his attention back to Rayla. What do you think? She sighed, shrugging as she adjusted Shio on her hip. There have been rumors about hidden dark mags for years, maybe that's just what it is, rumors. Holding Shio that bit closer, she tried to ignore the niggling doubt in her gut. She wasn't exactly good at hoping for the best when it came to dark mags and rumors and threats, but she'd made some hasty decisions in that arena before, and she did not want to repeat them. She liked to think 14 years would have allowed her to mature, to be less reactionary, but right now she couldn't help but worry. Callum took a deep breath, pursing his lips. Not about the dark mags. He glanced at Shio. About the halflings. Rayla sighed, unsure what to say to that. She didn't want to believe it. The idea of dark mags targeting halflings specifically enough to turn her stomach, but they'd be fools to ignore such a rumor. Especially if a number of people had apparently traveled all the way here from the border to tell them of it. Callum frowned, nodding his head before he gestured for her to begin walking in the direction of the castle building. Do you want to take Shio to our rooms? I can. I need to hear what's happening, Callum. She replied curtly, even though she knew he was only trying to help. Taking a deep breath, she smiled sadly at him. I need to hear what's happening directly from these people. He sighed, taking her hand as together they entered the stone building. I know. He took a deep breath. I just thought, if what the guard is saying is true, it might be hard to hear. Maybe. She exhaled slowly. But burying my head in the sand isn't helpful either. I assume you're going to want to bring Shio to the meeting. Callum stated plainly. Rayla glared at him. Yeah, of course, if. Hey, I'm not saying not to. He stopped and turned, squeezing her hand. I want us to have an answer if someone suggests we leave her with Shaw. Oh, Rayla looked admonished, her eyes moving to Shio's briefly. Shaw was sweet and capable, but right now she didn't feel like leaving Shio with her nanny. The little girl was still perched on Rayla's hip, playing distractedly with one of the buckles on Rayla's back. That makes sense. She shifted Shio, shaking her head when Callum quietly offered to take her. Considering what we're apparently going to be hearing, they're not going to expect us to be comfortable just leaving her. Callum shrugged, resuming their walk to the throne room. Well, this is a castle. Filled with guards. She should be safe here. No one is safe from dark mags. Rayla muttered as they continued walking. Notes. Thanks for reading. Any and all comments /emojis /kudos /etc absolutely make my day. As always, constructive criticism is welcome. Hope to see you for more next Wednesday. You can find me on my Tumblr, if you want to be spammed with Raylam and other random things. Chapter 2. Summary. More information comes to light as Ezran asks a favor of Callum. Notes. Thanks so much to everyone who read and commented on the first chapter. Life has been very busy this week, so sorry it's taken me some time to get to your comments. This week, the mystery deepens. See the end of the chapter for more notes. Chapter text. The guards opened the doors for them, and they stepped into the throne room. Callum looked around, immediately surprised by the large group of villagers huddled in the corner. Ezran was over speaking to them, looking solemn and concerned as he spoke softly. Upon hearing the door though, he turned to them, a momentary look of relief washing over his face. Callum, Rayla. He stepped forward, his face softening. Shio. Uncle Ez. Shio began to wriggle from Rayla's grip. Not right now, sweetheart. Rayla attempted to calm her. It's King Ezran in here, remember? Shio pouted, looking disgruntled, though she stopped trying to escape. That's all right. Ezran walked quickly to join them. Maybe Uncle Ez can keep Shio busy while you both talk to our guests. Stella and Bait have been looking for their little buddy. He looked imploringly at Callum and Rayla. Callum watched Rayla hand Shio over, appearing clearly reluctant. Which he understood. It wasn't like they didn't trust Ez to look after Shio, but considering the news they had just heard, he didn't want any distance between their daughter and them. Best get this conversation over with, so they could go back to holding Shio. He glanced at Rayla as they made their way over to the group. She smiled stiffly at him, grasping his hand for a moment and giving his fingers a squeeze. The villagers before them looked truly awful, tired and haggard, most with red-rimmed eyes. It appeared someone had called for food, the table laden with various items, but few seemed to be eating. A broad, strong-looking woman got to her feet as they approached. Something about the way she carried herself gave the impression she was the leader of the band. From the weary set to her shoulders, Callum assumed this was a de facto role, rather than one she had sought out. Prince Callum, Princess Rayla. She bowed a little awkwardly, clearly unaccustomed to the gesture. Thank you for taking time to speak with us. Of course. Rayla furrowed her brow, eyes moving from the woman to the people behind her and back again. The guard said. Callum's voice caught in his throat as, despite his best efforts, he glanced over his shoulder, looking for Shio. She was playing with the map table, Ezran holding her up on a chair as she leaned over. Callum turned back to the woman. Dark mags came. He couldn't bring himself to even say it. They took them. A man slumped in a chair cried out, struggling to his feet. An Earthblood woman beside him tried to get him to sit, his leg heavily bandaged and clearly causing him pain. He ignored her, limping a step closer. The children. They took them. Only the halflings. Rayla managed to choke out, eyes darting to Callum's for a moment. Yes, the man gasped, tears in his eyes. My son, they took him. Callum took a strangled breath, stepping forward and guiding the man back to his seat. What happened? When did they come? The man shuddered, covering his face with his hands as he leaned forward. In the night. The Earthblood woman spoke up, resting her hand on the man's shoulder. They must have known how many. Where? She clearly struggled to speak, tears in her eyes too. They came in the night. Into our room. He was sleeping by our bed. Callum felt sick, pushing away images of him and Rayla in such a scenario. Shio, spirited away. He took a deep breath, his chest tight. Did they attack anyone? Use any spells? We tried to fight back, to stop them. The man struggled upright once again. But what could we do against such power? How could we ever stop them? There are many dead. The lead woman spoke up again, her voice tight. We are merely the survivors. Thank you for speaking to us. I realize this has been very difficult. Callum nodded at Rayla as he stood a little straighter. We will discuss what you've told us with the king. Are you going to help us? A small meek-looking woman cried out. Her face was heavily bandaged, one eye hidden underneath the grubby material. Are you going to help us get our children back? Callum swallowed, eyes darting to Rayla's. She smiled sadly at the woman, stepping a fraction closer. We'll do everything we can to bring your children back to you. Turning, she caught Callum's eye, inclining her head in the direction of Ezran and Shio. Look, Dada. Shio grinned at Callum as they approached, clearly delighted with the scene she had created on the map. Wonderful, Shio. Callum forced a smile, walking swiftly around the table to stand next to her. He ran his fingers through her hair, eyes darting to the scared villagers. He didn't miss more than one of them watching him, their expressions varied. Why don't we discuss the situation in the council room? Opalai suggested, looking between Shio and the villagers too. Probably for the best. Ezran sighed, his brow furrowed. Hymage, Rayla, would you like for me to summon? No. Rayla and Callum replied in unison, both clearly anticipating Opalai was about to suggest leaving Shio with her nanny. The cleric merely nodded, obviously seeing there was no room for debate. Stepping back, she gestured for them all to leave the throne room. What do you think? Ezran asked before even taking his seat as Soren closed the door behind them. Callum looked at Rayla, sighing. He was too restless to sit, opting instead to lean against his chair. I think we ignored the rumors of dark mags on the borders for too long. Callum, Rayla cautioned, looking pointedly at him. We've been too optimistic. He threw his hands up in the air and began pacing. The whole situation had him tense and wound up. Ezran's endless positivity, something he'd struggled with on and off over the years. Callum had hoped that the rumors of dark mags had just been that, rumors, but he'd rested too easy to. Accepted what he wanted to be true, rather than what was most likely. After everything they'd been through though, he'd wanted to rest. Enjoy first being married and then, when Shio came into their lives, spend time just being a family. Anyway, even if there were dark mags hiding in the kingdom, what were they compared to Aravos? They'd be able to deal with such a nuisance easily and without much concern. Or so he'd told himself. He'd never in his worst nightmares considered something like this though. You never found any evidence of dark mags on the borders? Ezran insisted. We clearly didn't look hard enough. Callum bit back. Or there were none to find. Rayla looked up from where Shio was sitting on her lap, playing with the buckles of her many belts. This could be new. Maybe, Callum huffed, collapsing into his own chair. Or it's old and been well hidden, Rayla continued. Regardless, we need to deal with it now. Deal with it how? Callum asked, frowning at her. Find those halflings. Rayla spoke like it was obvious. Or find the dark mags and get them to lead us to the halflings. Callum bit his lip, sighing. Rayla. You don't know they are there. She took a deep breath, looking like she was taking great effort to calm herself. Who knows what dark mags want with them? I think we can probably guess. Callum furrowed his brow. He didn't want to voice his concerns, not here, not in front of Shio, even if she was too young to understand, but he was not holding out hope for finding those who'd been taken. Or rather, finding them alive. They took children, Callum. Rayla clutched Shio a little tighter. He sighed, looking away from her. ZYM had been a baby when Viren tried to harvest him. She didn't really believe this could end happily, did she? Looking around the room, he noted the varied expressions on those present. Ezran looked hopeful like Rayla, perhaps a little more even. Soren seemed to be struggling to decide how to feel. Barius too, perhaps. Corvus and Opali, however, clearly shared his opinion, their faces grave. We need a plan. Ezran got to his feet. These are citizens of Katolis, we have to do everything we can to help them. He took a deep breath, turning to look at Callum. Callum, how long do you think it would take you to fly to the border? Callum pursed his lips, eyes moving to Rayla and Shio. He knew this was coming, obviously. Without a dragon on hand, he was the swiftest of them. He absolutely did not want to leave Rayla and Shio though. A day or so, with the right wind, Highness. Opali spoke, looking pointedly at Callum. He swallowed, looking away from her. Yeah, about that. Can you go to this village? See what you can find. Ezran held his gaze, staring knowingly at Callum. He might have said can, but Callum knew a command when he heard one. He'd challenged Ezran before, of course, but not on matters like this. The right thing to do clearly was to go and see what he could find, but he very much did not want to do the right thing now. He wanted to stay with his family, protect them, the kingdom be damned. He looked between Rayla and Ezran. He could tell she felt the same. She was holding Shio tightly as their little girl played quietly with Stella now. After a brief pause her face softened, and she sighed just a little, nodding her head. I don't expect to find anything useful. Callum looked back to Ezran. I assume I'll be back quickly. Ezran visibly relaxed, clearly anticipating pushback. Thank you, Callum. Callum sighed as he tucked the blankets tighter around Shio. She was sleeping soundly in the middle of their large bed. He and Rayla hadn't even discussed putting her to sleep in her room, even if it adjoined theirs. Rayla exited the washroom, toweling her still damp hair. She smiled sadly at Shio, walking over and taking a seat next to them both. You packed? Her eyes darted to the bag resting against the small desk in the corner. Callum merely nodded, reaching for her hand. I wish I could go with you. She shuffled closer to him, squeezing his fingers. Sighing, Callum pulled her into his lap, wrapping his arms around her. I'm glad you can't. He whispered into her hair, leaning back to kiss her temple. I want you both as far away from these dark mags as possible. And I want to be with you in case anything happens. Rayla sighed, pressing her forehead against his as she ran her fingers through his hair. I know. He smiled, cupping her cheek and kissing her. But I don't trust anyone more than you to keep Shio safe. Hopefully she is safe. We're so far from the border and she's probably the most protected halfling on the continent. Rayla sighed, pulling him closer. True. Callum tried to force a smile. Rayla was correct, of course. Still, he couldn't fight the disconcerting feeling in the pit of his belly. Something about this whole thing seemed off. You'll be quick. In and out. Satisfy as. Rayla caught his eye, her brow furrowed. That's the plan. Callum nodded, kissing her briefly. Taking a breath, he turned to watch Shio sleeping as he continued. But you should pack too. Rayla leaned back, clearly confused. Pack. We don't know how far these dark mags are willing to go. Callum spoke hurriedly. You and Shio might be safer at the Nexus. What about you? Rayla bit her lip. I'm not leaving you, Callum. He sighed. Hopefully it's nothing. Or isolated. Maybe they've got what they wanted. He swallowed past the lump in his throat, imagining poor faceless children taken away by dark mags. But we need to be prepared to leave, if it comes to that. Rayla took a deep breath, her eyes darting to Shio. I'll pack as soon as you leave tomorrow. Callum stood on the battlements, watching as the sun began to rise above the mountains to the east. Flying into the rising sun was the least of his worries this morning. Beside him stood Rayla and Shio, Ezran a little behind them and Soren leaning sleepily against the door to the stairs. Hitching his pack on his back, he turned to his brother. I'll send word if I find anything. He found he couldn't bring himself to say more. It was probably selfish of him, but he resented Ezran for asking him to leave his family at a time like this. Rationally, he understood. Of course Ezran had to think of his kingdom and his subjects. That was his burden as king, something Callum had never envied. Still, there were times where he felt special consideration could have been made for family. It would have taken a troop of soldiers much longer to get to the border than him, but considering how much time had passed, it didn't seem that unreasonable. As High Mage he was uniquely qualified to search for evidence of magic though. And he would be there and back before any soldiers would even reach the area. He was the most logical choice to go. He'd do this. Look the area over, and then, once he was back, decide what to do. Decide what was best for him and his family. Hopefully there was nothing to this. Hopefully it was simply an isolated incident. Hopefully they had nothing more to worry about. Thank you, Callum. Ezran stepped up to him, embracing him in a tight hug. Sighing, Callum hugged him back, trying to force his annoyance and irritation deep down inside. No problem, Ez. He smiled genuinely as he stepped back. I expect an extra battalion assigned to keep my daughter safe. She needs that just to keep her out of regular trouble. Ezran chuckled, glancing over his shoulder at Rayla and Shio. Rayla snorted and rolled her eyes. Isn't that the truth? She hitched Shio on her hip, smiling at the sleeping child. Ezran nodded at both of them, then turned and left, clearly leaving them to their private goodbyes. Callum waited until he and Soren disappeared from view, then turned to Rayla. She hurried to him, wrapping her free arm around his waist and pressing her face into his neck. Stay safe, she whispered, squeezing him that bit tighter. You see any sign of trouble, you run the other way, okay? Leaning back, she looked imploringly into his eyes. Callum snorted, raising an eyebrow. Of course. He kissed her forehead. I'm not you. Rayla rolled her eyes, but didn't otherwise comment. Sighing, Callum looked to Shio, curled up asleep against Rayla's shoulder. Keep her safe, okay? He smoothed her messy hair, leaning forward to kiss her temple. Always. Rayla pulled Shio a little tighter against her. Don't worry about us. We're safe here. Callum nodded, hoping desperately for that to be true. I love you. Rayla smiled, her eyes glassy. I love you too. Callum stepped back, giving himself space to perform the wing spell. He held his hands out before him, inhaling deeply as he pictured the runes in his head, imagined the magic flowing through him. Manus. Pluma. Volantis. He paused for a moment, not needing to look at his arms to know the spell hadn't worked. Sighing, he glanced at Rayla. This had happened before, but years ago and under different circumstances. He'd received an urgent scroll on their honeymoon and reluctantly agreed to return to Catullus briefly before resuming. It quickly became clear though that while his head might have agreed to leave, his heart was resolutely not in it. Perhaps it wasn't that surprising this issue had arisen again. Rayla chuckled softly, a cheeky glint in her eye that told him she remembered the last time this had happened too. Hey, you said it wasn't a big deal last time this happened. He was grateful for the change in tone, even if it was likely to be brief. It's not like I wanted you to leave then either. She shrugged, squeezing his hand. Callum smiled at her, taking another deep breath and repeating the incantation. This time he focused solely on the spell, pushing other thoughts and anxieties from his mind. Manus. Pluma. Volantis. He spoke louder, more commanding, relaxing a little as he felt the spell take this time. Shio grumbled, pushing her face into Rayla's neck as she stretched. Wincing, Callum looked apologetically at Rayla. Sorry. She snorted, rolling her eyes. It wasn't like I'd have much chance settling her now anyway. She turned to Shio, encouraging her to wake. Anyway, I always feel bad when you leave and she doesn't get to say goodbye. Callum sighed, extending his wings as he stepped closer to them. Yeah, but I always feel like an ass leaving when she's upset. Oh, and you prefer me being the ass to tell her daddy left without saying goodbye? Rayla smirked at him. Well, yeah, Callum chuckled, shrugging at her. Dummy Rayla tickled his side, appearing to relish the fact he couldn't easily stop her in this form. Dada. Shio pouted, sitting up a little straighter and reaching for Callum. You going, Dada? Not for long this time, Smelly. Callum nuzzled her as best he could, his wings far too large and cumbersome to properly hold her. He smiled gratefully at Rayla as she held Shio for him. I'll be back as soon as I can, I promise. Okay. Shio sniffed, her bottom lip extended as she leaned back a little and held his face clumsily. I love you in the whole world, Dada. Callum laughed softly at her awkward phrasing. I love you in the whole world too, Shio. Notes. Oh no, Callum and Rayla separated by duty. Not likely to be a stress-free time for either of them. Hopefully they're not apart for too long. Thanks for reading. Any and all comments /emojis /kudos /etc absolutely make my day. As always, constructive criticism is welcome. Hope to see you for more next Wednesday. You can find me on my Tumblr, if you want to be spammed with Raylan and other random things. Chapter 3. Summary. Rayla tries to keep Shio safe and happy, while she waits on news of Callum. Notes. Thanks so much to everyone who comments on the previous chapter. Poor Callum and Rayla, split up when they absolutely do not want to be. Things can't get worse, can they? See the end of the chapter for more notes. Chapter text. Rayla glanced at Shio. Her daughter was sleeping in the bed next to her, her little head not quite on Callum's pillow. She looked tiny in their large bed, her wee body swamped by blankets. It was stupid, but Rayla almost felt like they offered some form of protection, a sanctuary from, what? She didn't even know. It certainly was possible that the attack on the border village was an isolated incident. Surely, it was far enough away that even if it wasn't, it was unlikely Shio was in any particular danger. Especially not here, in a heavily fortified castle occupied by countless guards and well, herself. Still, she found she couldn't rest easy, Shio and now Callum's safety her primary concern. Sighing, Rayla went back to working on her macram in a desperate bid to distract herself. She obviously disliked when Callum was away, but it was even more awful now, nothing but her own racing thoughts to distract her. She was well aware he could take care of himself, but she hated the idea of him out there, in the unknown entirely by himself. She wished she could be with him, both of them watching each other's back. Stronger together. Though, truth be told, she wished he hadn't gone at all. What she wouldn't give to have him here with her, both of them attempting to cheer each other up and take their mind off recent events. He'd be back soon, she told herself. She needed to keep her spirits up until then. The last thing she wanted was Shio picking up on her anxiety and fear. A warm breeze rustled the curtains of her open window and Rayla put her knotwork down and closed her eyes. Rayla. Callum's voice carried on the breeze, and she sighed with relief. Suzaras distance was a spell Callum learned early and he used it often when he was away, especially once Shio came into their lives. It allowed him to whisper on the wind, sending messages to them even if he was far away. Normally they were simple messages, of what he had been doing for the day or to let her know when he'd be back. As Shio got older he'd wish her good night. Rayla and Shio couldn't communicate back with him, at least not yet, but Rayla was happy hearing his voice all the same. Now, with him out potentially coming into contact with halfling stealing dark mags, hearing his voice at night allowed her to relax just a little. I hope you're both well back home and Shio's not got you too busy. Things are not great here. I haven't been able to find any trace of the halflings. I've tried History of Eventum all around and nothing. It's hard when you've nothing to go off. I guess we could have gone together, seen if you might have any more luck around full moon or something. I don't want Shio out here though, and I don't want her alone in the castle either. And I don't want you out here by yourself. Anyway, I'll head home first thing tomorrow. This seems pointless and I'm hating being away from you both more than usual. Obviously. I love you both. Stay safe and I'll see you tomorrow evening. Rayla sighed as his voice faded. Glancing over at Shio sleeping in their bed, she pulled the covers higher around her daughter's slightly pointed ears, smoothing her cheek with a finger. Even though she should probably feel guilty, she was glad Callum was coming back tomorrow. She hated the idea of him out alone, looking for dark mags. They obviously needed to find information on what was truly going on, why dark mags took those halflings, but she couldn't bear the thought of him actually finding them. Not him alone against who knew how many. But he'd be home tomorrow, and they could rest a little easier perhaps. They still needed to find out what was actually going on, but she would feel much better knowing Callum was safe while they did it. Rayla stood on the battlements and looked out over the sky for what felt like the 100th time that hour. It was cloudy and dull, and she couldn't see far even from this height. Shio tugged on her hand, attempting to pull her along. When is Dada home? She asked, looking up at Rayla. Soon, sweetheart. Rayla smiled at her, trying to sound reassuring. It was always difficult to gauge when Callum would be home. He could summon winds to speed him along, but they weren't much help if he was flying into a strong headwind. Clouds like the ones that were hanging over them didn't help either, and he was likely forced to fly lower, where the breezes were more chaotic and harder to control. She tried not to think he was late. He hadn't said what time he planned on being home, and he might have had a number of things he wanted to do before leaving. Hey. She glanced over her shoulder to find Ezran standing behind her. Hey Ez. Forcing a smile, she looked between him and the horizon. Ezran had done what he had to do as king. Callum might have been his brother, but he was also the High Mage. Of course, he had to go investigate magical happenings. Still, she couldn't help but wish Callum was more like the princes she'd imagined as a kid, spoiled and lazy. Useless and adept at letting others put their lives on the line for the kingdom. Not that she ever would have fallen for such a prince. Any sign of him? Ezran joined her overlooking the battlements, eyes moving across the sky. Not yet. Rayla squeezed Shio's hand, continuing to search for anything that could be Callum. This close to midsummer, there were still a number of hours of daylight left, but the day was moving from evening to night and Callum was getting closer and closer to officially being late. I'm hungry, Mama. Shio tugged on her hand again, sighing dramatically. What we have for dinner? Rayla sighed, glancing down at her daughter. Her stomach was too tied up in knots for her to be hungry, but she shouldn't have forgotten Shio would want something. She looked back to the sky, hoping desperately there would be some sign of Callum and then they could all have dinner together. Want me to take her? Ezran asked, smiling softly at Rayla. She bit her lip, looking between Shio and Ezran and the sky once again. More than anything, she wanted to be here when Callum returned, to greet him immediately. Letting Shio out of her sight seemed completely out of the question though, but if her daughter was hungry, what choice did she have? Or how about I bring something up here and we could have a picnic? Ezran crouched down next to Shio, winking at her. Rayla sighed, relaxing a little. Thanks, Ez. He squeezed her shoulder then turned and made his way to the stairs. Is Dada home yet? Shio sighed, swinging about on Rayla's arm. Rayla was grateful for the distraction of the picnic, books, and toys Ezran and Soren brought with them when they returned. She found she still couldn't eat, nor really participate much in the conversation, but she appreciated they were both distracting Shio so she could keep watch. She smiled as Shio and Ez read a picture book, while Soren munched on a sandwich, glancing back to the horizon as she had been for what felt like hours now. The sunlight was fading and the moon just after new, but she could still see well enough for the speck on the horizon to give her hope. Without a word, she got to her feet, approaching the battlements and clutching the rough stone as she kept her eyes on whatever it was in the distance. This far away, it could be anything. It was unlikely to be a dragon, of course, but sunbirds were used for communication with the Sunfire nations and were not infrequent visitors to Katolis. Even Luyan and Phoef sometimes made the journey. She heard Ezran pause his reading for a moment, then resume with increased vigor, clearly trying to keep Shio's attention on him and leave Rayla to watching. Her heart began to race as the speck grew larger and larger, its strange form slowly becoming more obvious, and she breathed a sigh of relief when it became clear that, from the expansive wingspan, it could be nothing but someone using mage wings. Well, he took his time. Soren clapped her on the back, smiling widely at her. He does like his dramatic exits and entrances though, doesn't he? He squeezed her shoulder, smile softening and showing he was anxious for Callum's safety too. No more than the rest of us. She snorted, squeezing the hand on her shoulder gratefully. They stood watching as Callum approached, his dark figure getting bigger and bigger until they could make out his features. A sudden gust of wind buffeted them, making Rayla grimace as she crouched down and shielded Shio's body with her own. She squinted into the breeze, trying to fix her eyes on Callum. He had clearly conjured this gale, using it to help propel him home. A dark figure alighted on the battlements, stumbling onto the rough sandstone beside her. The wind dropped as suddenly as it appeared and Rayla looked up to find Callum swaying and looking pale, his wings hanging heavy by his sides. Callum. Rayla dropped Shio's hand as she ran to him, cushioning his fall as he stumbled to his knees. You pushed yourself too hard, she admonished, frowning at his sweaty brow and heaving chest. Callum merely shook his head, smiling softly at her and then Shio behind her, clearly too out of breath to protest verbally. Shio ran up to him, a bright grin on her little face as she threw her arms around his neck. Dada! She squealed loudly, hanging off his shoulders. Laughing, Callum plonked onto his rear, wrapping his still-winged arms around her as he struggled to slow his breathing. Ezran sighed, stepping closer to them all, a frown on his face. Did you find anything? Oh, for the Rayla jumped to her feet, putting herself between Callum and Ezran as she struggled to control her temper. She rarely got upset with Ez, but after the stress of the past few days, her patience with everything asked of Callum was wearing thin. Can't you see he can barely speak, Ez? Give him a minute to catch his breath. Ezran's face fell, his eyes darting to Callum and then back to the castle. Taking a deep breath, Rayla reached for his hand as a stab of guilt twisted her gut. Ezran had a lot on his plate, she was well aware. Not only was he worried about Callum, he was also worried about his people too. Despite Opalai's cautions, he'd been spending increasing time with the villagers, clearly trying to do as much as he could to calm and reassure them. He was a good king, caring and kind. Of course, he'd want to report back to these people. Rayla had already told him what Callum had relayed to her, but he was clearly hoping something might have changed over the course of the day. Sighing, she squeezed his fingers. Give him half an hour to eat and change and we'll come down and report what we know then, okay? Ezran smiled, taking her hand in both of his. Thanks Rayla. I'll see you guys in the throne room. She nodded, letting go of his hand and turning back to Callum and Shio. They were still sitting on the hard stone floor, Shio babbling excitedly while Callum smiled at her. He had banished his wings, cradling Shio in his arms instead. Hey, he smiled at Rayla as she sat beside them, dark circles under his eyes. Nice to be home. It's nice to have you back. She reached for his hand, feeling instantly better to have his skin against hers. Bad conditions. She nodded at the dark skies. Not ideal, Callum breathed, but I wanted to see you both and I really didn't want to camp another night. Rayla smiled softly. It wasn't like she was unhappy he was home, but it was always hard to see him push himself so far. Come on, she got up, holding out her hand for him. Let's get you someplace more comfortable, at least. Shio insisted on staying attached to Callum in some manner, and they finally compromised on her sitting on his shoulders. Rayla could see from the tremble in his arms that he was utterly exhausted and wouldn't be able to carry her any other way. She walked beside him, a hand on his back and ready to catch Shio if she made any sudden moves. It seemed apparent that Callum might not have the strength to catch her if she fell. She took Shio from him as soon as they entered their room, unsurprised to see Callum collapse onto their bed immediately after. Shio ran up and joined him, giggling as he pulled her into his arms and cuddled her. Rayla joined them, sighing as she ran her fingers through his wind-ruffled hair. How are you? She smiled at him and Shio, both of them looking more than a little sleepy. Happy to be home. Callum reached for her hand, bringing it to his lips as he kissed her knuckles. I missed you. We missed you too. Rayla squeezed his fingers, feeling some of the tension leave her body now she could see he was home safe. You didn't learn anything new before leaving, I assume? No, nothing, but at least Ez and Opalai will be appeased. Callum shook his head, looking disgruntled. True, Rayla sighed. The villagers won't be though. She frowned, thinking of their distraught faces. She didn't even want to contemplate what she would do in their situation. With no leads to go on, what could they do? She wasn't sure she would have been able to wait and hope for news. They were farmers and merchants though. What could they do against a group of dark mags? What a hopeless situation for them. No, Callum sighed, stroking Shio's hair. And I know you probably want to help them. But she anticipated, soothing the heavy frown on his forehead. But I don't want to be them. He glanced at her as he pulled Shio a little closer against his chest. She had grown quiet, cradled between them as she was, her eyelids were drooping. You want to leave? Rayla stated, reading him like a book after all these years. Of course, Callum was going to want to leave. He'd said as much before his trip, but he looked resolved now. It could be isolated. He conceded, worrying his lip. But it might not be either. Maybe it's something. There are more halflings now with the borders open this long. Maybe we didn't hear about it before, or maybe dark mags have discovered something new. I don't know and I don't want to find out. Rayla sighed, looking around their room, their home. You don't think it's safer here? She wasn't sure herself, but they needed to discuss it. Where would we go if we left? It would just be us, just the two of us. Callum smoothed Shio's hair as he moved back slowly, extracting himself from the tangle of tiny limbs. I know, but I feel exposed here. He frowned, reaching for Rayla's hand. The entire kingdom knows Shio is a halfling. The most well-protected halfling in Katolis. Perhaps the continent. Rayla took his hand, not entirely convinced of her own words, but feeling the need to acknowledge that fact. Why would they come after her? Not her specifically, but Callum sighed, shaking his head. I don't know, but I feel useless sitting here and doing nothing knowing there are dark mags out there maybe looking for halflings. Rayla nodded, knowing how he felt. She hadn't been able to relax since they got news of this disappearance. Would she feel safe leaving Shio with her nanny while she and Callum attended council meetings? Would they stop leaving the castle walls and hold up here? The township felt ominous now. So many people, coming and going. Any number of them could be a dark mage. But was that just paranoia? Just fear? Or was there more going on here than they understood? She didn't know what to do, what the right choice was. I should probably tell the council what I learned before they come knocking. Callum rubbed his thumb across hers soothingly. We can talk more after. Okay, Rayla took a deep breath, eyes drifting to Shio, now sleeping soundly. Want me to carry her? You must be exhausted. Let her nap. Callum pulled Rayla into his arms, holding her close. I'll give Ez a briefing and be back. We'll figure out what to do then. Rayla nodded, eyes moving between Callum and Shio. You need a nap more than she does. She cupped his cheek, frowning at him. I'll make it quick. He kissed her forehead. I'll just tell Ez what I found, which is nothing, and then come back. He got up and made his way to the door. Rayla followed him, reluctant to separate after the days apart. He was right though, there was no point in bringing a sleepy toddler to a late council meeting. It would only delay things and they did need to talk as soon as he got back to their room. I'll ring for some food. She hugged him again as he opened the door, giving him a peck on the cheek for good measure. Thanks Rayla. I won't be long. He kissed her quickly, pulling the door quietly closed. You really found nothing? Ezran's face fell as Callum finished explaining what he had learned on his trip. Nothing helpful, no. Callum tried not to sound too impatient. He understood what Ezran meant. It was frustrating to him not being able to help beyond what he'd done, but he hadn't really expected to find anything after the time that had passed. Surely Ezran would have been prepared for the eventuality too. Have many people remained in the village? Opalai asked, looking up from the book she used to scribble notes. It wasn't large to begin with. Frowning, Callum wondered what this line of questioning could possibly establish. Obviously not everyone would leave, even in the event that there were dark mags in the area. He'd only seen humans during his few days investigating, and he assumed whatever elves remained would have fled, even if they didn't have children. Many humans didn't like dark magic, but they didn't fear it the way Zadians did. I didn't see any elves, but obviously not everyone could just leave. Those who stayed behind didn't have any more information than what we know though. What do we tell the villagers? Ezran looked around the room, clearly hoping for some kind of advice as to how to break this lack of news to them. Callum sighed, rubbing the bridge of his nose. None of this had been what he wanted to convey to Ezran, but he'd done what he could and now he needed to look after his own family. He and Rayla needed to properly talk, to decide what to do. The castle was heavily fortified obviously, but if dark mags were looking for halflings, a very well-known one lived here. Was Shio safer in the castle, surrounded by soldiers, or were they better off to take her and go into hiding, hoping whatever this was would blow over? A raid on a border town didn't necessarily mean an increased danger here, so far away, but even the thought of it made him uneasy. Regardless, he wasn't going to sort things out here, listening to the council debate the whole affair. He needed to go see Rayla and make plans themselves. Catching Ezran's eye, he leaned forward, hoping to explain his intention to leave discreetly. He didn't have the patience for any more questions, and he would definitely snap if someone were to suggest he stay any longer. He'd already spent days away from his family. Ezran raised his eyebrows upon making eye contact, getting to his feet and making to move around the table. Before he could reach Callum, however, there was a knock at the door. A moment later a guard entered. Begging your pardon, Your Majesty. She bowed to Ezran, barely contained excitement clear on her face. The missing children. It seems they have been found. Ezran's face lit up and he got to his feet immediately. Really? How? Where? If you'll permit, their savior begs an audience. The guard gestured behind her. Of course. Bring them in. Ezran hurried around the map table, smiling widely at Callum. Callum got up too, sighing in relief. Hopefully this entire mess could be resolved quickly. There would obviously be more questions, but if the children had been found safe and sound, perhaps things weren't as dire as they had first suspected. The guard opened the door wider, and a group crowded in, led by a figure in a hood. Frowning, Callum glanced at his staff, once again feeling uneasy. He knew certain cultures and positions covered their heads, but this person wasn't just wearing a hood, they seemed to be attempting to hide their face. Once everyone was inside the throne room and the doors closed, the lead figure stepped forward, pulling back the dark hood that obscured their face. Callum stared in disbelief as, to his shock and horror, Claudia stood before him in the throne room. She smiled awkwardly, announcing herself with a stiff wave. Hey guys. Notes. Talk about a blast from the past. What can this mean? Thanks for reading. Any and all comments /emojis/kudos/etc absolutely make my day. As always, constructive criticism is welcome. Hope to see you for more next Wednesday. You can find me on my Tumblr, if you want to be spammed with Raylam and other random things. Chapter 4. Summary. Claudia tries to explain what she knows, but it seems she has some revelations that are of particular interest to Callum, Rayla and Shio. Notes. Claudia's back. Dun dun dun. And also Terry. Terry wasn't actually around when I started writing this fic, and he was a bit of a spanner in the works when I went back to draft 2, but ultimately, well, we shall see. Thanks to everyone who commented /kudos/etc on the fic so far. I forgot how fun weekly updates of a completed fic are. Smiling face with open mouth and tightly closed eyes. Hope you enjoy this chapter as we perhaps learn a little more about what might be going on. See the end of the chapter for more notes. Chapter text. Callum hadn't seen Claudia in years, but she had changed little in that time. Half of her hair was still shockingly white, her locks shorter and hanging loose around her shoulders now. Her clothing was worn and old, and she looked thinner and pale. He didn't for a second think that didn't mean she wasn't potentially dangerous. She may have helped them defeat Aravos almost a decade ago, but he had hoped he'd go the rest of his life without seeing her again. What did she mean by turning up unannounced like this? And with the missing children? Had she taken them? Was this some kind of ransom attempt? He raised his hand, preparing to draw a rune. The throne room was large, but not large enough for him to use fulmines, not without risking hurting the others. Soren drew his sword too, he and Corvus putting themselves in front of Ezran. The soldiers present responded to their action immediately, advancing with their weapons drawn. Hey, no. Stop. Claudia raised her hands, eyes darting around the room. I'm here to help. You think we believe that? Callum scoffed, incredulous. He had no idea what Claudia's game was, and he was pretty sure he didn't want to find out. You just happened to turn up now. Of course I didn't happen to just turn up. Claudia scoffed, gesturing to the children behind her. And not just with our little friends here, I have information. She kept her arms raised, clearly trying to convey she wasn't a threat. Information. Soren gripped his blade tighter, looking between Claudia and Ezran. Despite himself, Callum glanced around at the children, frowning further when he saw Terry step forward, a bundle cradled in his arms. The Earthblood elf seemed terrified, looking between Claudia and the various humans standing on guard waiting. A moment later there was a soft cry and Callum realized Terry was carrying a baby. You really found the missing halflings? Ezran gazed at the group, eyes wide and bright. All of them. We did. Claudia smiled at Terry, seeming to relax a little. Or she took them in the first place. Callum moved closer to Ezran, his staff still raised. Really? Claudia scoffed, her nose upturned. That's what you think of me, Callum. He laughed harshly, rolling his eyes at the look Claudia gave him. She was offended. Considering you teamed up with Aravos, you'll have to excuse me if I'm not looking to give you the benefit of the doubt. I helped you defeat him, didn't I? Claudia glared at him. Anyway, we wouldn't have had anyone to defeat if you hadn't freed him in the first place. You didn't give me a choice. Callum seethed, unable and unwilling to make eye contact with the others in the room. He knew people had suffered because of what he'd done, but he wasn't going to accept someone like Claudia trying to use that against him. Stop it. Ezran stepped between them and reached out to Callum. We should be talking, not arguing. After a beat, Callum nodded stiffly but refused to lower his staff. Ez was right, arguing wasn't getting them anywhere, but he wasn't about to relax around Claudia. We need to get these children back to their parents, first and foremost. Once that's happened, we can figure out what to do from there. Ezran smiled at him, then turned to one of the guards. Can you please let the people from Lut know their children have been located? Escort them to the throne room. Callum stepped a little closer to Ezran, not wanting to be overheard. Are you sure that's a good idea? They might not be the children, they could be illusions or dark magic constructs. We can't trust what Claudia is saying. Ezran glanced at the children, Callum's eyes following a moment later. They did look worse for wear, filthy and thin, most of them with dark circles under their eyes. We can't keep them from their parents, Callum. Ezran turned back to him. If it was Shio, you'd want to come, wouldn't you? Even if it might have been a trap. Don't, Callum hissed, not missing Claudia's eyes dart to them. Don't use my daughter in this. Ezran's face fell, but he collected himself quickly. I'm not. He paused, sighing. Think of it from those people's perspective. They've been missing their children for days now. If there's a chance they've been found, they'd take it, don't you think? Callum sighed, not having a response for that. Throughout this entire ordeal he'd been steadfastly refusing to put himself in those parents' shoes. He didn't want to think about what it would be like if we should still be cautious. He glanced at Opalai, silently requesting she join the discussion. Quick and observant as ever, she stepped around the guards and looked between him and Ezran, though she waited for one of them to speak. We should prepare food in one of the banquet rooms. Bedding too. Callum glanced at the guards, then Opalai. Call for healers. Let everyone stay there, together, until we are sure everyone is all right. Keep these children in one place, under their watchful eye. Opalai clearly read his intentions, nodding quickly. Hymage, Callum presents a reasonable option. It would be easier to feed and attend to the children if they were all together. Easier to guard them too, Ezran sighed. He was often too naive for Callum's liking, but he wasn't stupid. You're both right, of course. He nodded at Opalai, who excused herself with a bow, moving quickly to make the arrangements. I know you like to think the best of people, but you need to be careful. Callum glanced at Claudia and Terry. Something is going on here that we don't understand. Then we should talk to them and find out, don't you think? Ezran looked at him pointedly. Sighing once again, Callum watched as his little brother, his king, turned and walked over to the closest group of children. Ezran smiled warmly at them, clearly trying to put them at ease. Callum was at least gratified to see Soren and Corvus standing close by, eyes continually moving across the crowd, lingering on Claudia in particular. Gripping his staff that bit tighter, Callum turned to her himself. What sort of game is this? He asked, finally able to collect his thoughts. What are you planning? I'm not planning anything. Claudia huffed, looking disgruntled. Haven't you been looking for these kids? And you just happened to find them. Callum shifted his staff from one hand to the other, sneering at Claudia. No, I didn't just happen to find them. I've been looking for them. Claudia spoke to him like he was stupid, and Terry took a step closer to her. Why? Callum watched her, eyes searching for any sign of deceit or deception. Because I didn't like the idea that Dark Mags took a bunch of kids. She snapped, scowling. Terry put a hand on her shoulder, and she looked over at him. Claudia sighed, her shoulders falling a little. And I wanted to come home. I miss Catullus. This hasn't been your home in years. Callum replied coolly. She gave up the right to call Catullus home when she turned traitor. When she took up arms against Ezran. Before she could respond, the door to the throne room swung open and a group hurried inside. The next few minutes were a blur of embraces and crying. Parents breaking down as they hugged children, many of them clearly thought dead. Through it all, Callum kept his gaze fixed on Claudia. She might have been flanked by guards, her belongings confiscated and out of reach, but she couldn't be trusted. A dark mage of her skills was not one to be underestimated. As he had suggested, the families were guided to a banquet hall on the other side of the castle, leaving only those who needed to be present in the throne room. Ezran took a deep breath as the doors finally closed, turning to Claudia and Terry. Now that everyone is back together, I think it would be helpful to all if you would tell us exactly what you have to do with all this. Nothing. Claudia sighed, her brow furrowed. Or, well, nothing to do with taking those kids. We wanted to come back, or well, I wanted to come back, and it seemed like a good way of getting you to trust me. I didn't think I'd be punished for finding a bunch of kidnapped kids. Asking you questions is not punishment. Callum glared at her, furious at this self-pitying display. Of course Claudia would refuse to accept responsibility. What person in their right mind would trust her if she turned up like she had? Ignoring him, she turned her attention back to Ezran. I should have taken you up on the offer to come home back when Dad, but it was too hard. Catullus reminded me too much of. She wiped her cheek, eyes darting to Soren for a moment. So, when I heard about what happened, well, it seemed like maybe it would be a good way to get you to trust me again. To maybe get the same offer. It would be self-serving, you mean? Callum resisted the urge to pace. He was already tired of listening to this. If that's how you see it. Claudia replied coldly. The most important thing right now is that the children have been found and are back with their parents. Ezran spoke quickly, obviously keen to stop an argument before it started. Do you know any more about this whole thing? Are there likely to be more attacks? Claudia sighed, shrugging her shoulders. I don't exactly know what they wanted with the half-breeds, but I can guess. So yes, then. Callum interrupted, mind immediately going to Shio and Rayla upstairs. Yeah, Claudia looked back to Ezran. Probably. We need to send word to the rest of the country. Ezran turned slightly, beckoning a guard over. And to the other nations. We need to prepare crows. Callum swallowed, glancing at the door, thinking of his family. He wanted Shio and Rayla both as far away from Claudia as possible. He could already see Ezran bending, hoping, but they couldn't risk trusting her. We need to offer shelter to all halflings. Ezran spoke clearly, turning his attention to Opali. And the other kingdoms need to be informed. Zadia too. Of course, Your Majesty. Opali nodded at one of the lower clerics, who got to their feet. The Crow Master will be informed immediately. Callum struggled to pay attention as these orders were given, his thoughts with Rayla and Shio. He knew he should have nothing to worry about in the castle, but he wouldn't rest easy until he saw them both. He wanted this meeting to be over so he could go to them, assure himself they were both safe. That's not all. Claudia interrupted, glancing at Callum briefly before looking away. What do you mean? He asked quickly, knowing she was trying to get his attention and not caring to look above her manipulations right now. Claudia sighed, her shoulders falling a little. She looked intently at Callum, serious and focused. Your daughter, Shio. His stomach dropped when, just then the door to the throne room opened, and Rayla stepped inside, Shio perched on her hip. Rayla's eyes found his and she smiled softly before she seemed to notice Claudia on the other side of the table. Immediately, she reached for a blade, pulling Shio close against her. It's all right, Rayla. Ezran called out, getting to his feet. Claudia is here to help. She found the halflings. Rayla didn't relax though, her eyes moving between Callum's and Ezran's. Callum took a deep breath, shaking his head softly. Rayla would know what that meant. Yep, I think it's ridiculous too. He shifted his hand on his staff. Shio squealed in delight and wriggled until Rayla crouched down to let her walk by herself. Callum vaguely noticed Ezran calling the meeting to a close as he got to his feet and hurried to meet his daughter halfway. He lifted her into his arms, squeezing her little body tightly as he handed his staff to Rayla. Shio giggled, hugging him back. Dada, you squish me. Sorry, Stinky. Callum leaned back to smile at her. I missed you, is all. Shio laughed in response, resting her head against his shoulder. Dada silly. She's beautiful. Callum felt his blood run cold at the words. He pulled Shio closer against him as he turned to find Claudia smiling fondly at him, Terry a few steps behind. She has your smile. Claudia looked between Callum and Shio, smiling softly. Callum frowned at her, trying to decipher what angle she was working. It's no wonder they're especially interested in her. Claudia's smile faltered. She looks special. What? Rayla's question came in a hushed whisper as she stepped closer to Callum and Shio. What are you talking about? Shio. Claudia sighed, her shoulders slumping. Well, she's different from other half-breeds, isn't she? Callum and Rayla exchanged a look, as Callum turned his body a little, unconsciously shielding their daughter from Claudia. In what way? He asked, hand resting protectively on Shio's back. Claudia shrugged, not meeting either of their eyes. Well, you know, she looked at Callum. Daughter of the first human to connect to primal magic in centuries, she smiled in apparent contrition at Rayla. Shio's not exactly like other half-breeds, is she? Callum swallowed, pulling Shio closer against him. She's our daughter, but she's adopted. Everyone knows that. Shio did too. They never hid it from her. Still, he preferred not to discuss it openly and certainly not around someone like Claudia. Yet, if the confusion put Shio in danger. Claudia made a face, almost like she was struggling not to laugh. Callum. I don't. I know it's not my place and we don't know each other like we used to, but... He frowned at her uncharacteristic mumbling. What? Well, it's hardly a secret. Claudia glanced at Rayla again, a hand idly pulling at a strand of loose hair. Claudia, what are you talking about? Callum snapped angrily, causing Shio to fuss and reach for her mother. Callum gave her up in favor of his staff, feeling ashamed for having startled her, but wanting more to address whatever Claudia was confused about. Or pretending to be confused about. The way she was being coy and talking around the issue, it didn't seem like Claudia to him. She wasn't known for her restraint back when she last lived in the castle. He didn't trust her. Callum, it happens. Princes can have whatever they want. Whoever they want, right? And it obviously worked out for you both. She attempted to look around him and smile at Shio, who was hiding behind Rayla's hair. The important thing is you decided to bring her home. She'd be in much more danger if she was out in the villages with her mother. She is with her mother. Callum snapped. Callum, Claudia looked at him, pity in her eyes. Are you? Callum's brain was struggling to piece together whatever she was implying. Do you think she owes my daughter with some other woman? He could feel his temper flaring, ignoring Rayla's hand on his shoulder. Well, isn't she? Claudia shrugged. Fuck you. He spat at her, blood coursing through his veins. Guards. He practically yelled at the two guards standing to attention at the end of the table. Take her and throw her in the dungeon. He turned his back on Claudia, furious. What's happening? Ezran rushed over as the guards flanked Claudia and Terry, grabbing both of their arms. She has nothing to say worth listening to. Callum glared at Ezran as he stepped closer to Rayla and Shio. The dungeon. Ezran looked between Callum and Claudia. Ezran, she's dangerous. You can't have her roaming free. Callum turned to his younger brother. She brought the halflings back though. And she'll tell us everything she knows, right? Ezran looked between Callum and Claudia. We'd all be in more danger if not for that. Callum looked at Ezran, incredulous, stunned dumb. How after all these years, after everything that had happened, how could he still be this forgiving? This naive? It's probably best not to continue this discussion right now. Opalai nodded to the guards. Hymage Callum's suggestion is likely the best course of action while we figure this out, Your Majesty. Ezran sighed, nodding. I suppose. He looked at the guards. Make sure they are fed and watered. Thank you, Ezran. Claudia smiled at him as she and Terry were led away. King Ezran, Callum corrected, furious beyond measure. The doors closed solidly but silence remained in the room. Callum took deep breaths, attempting to slow the racing of his heart. He glanced at Rayla and Shio, breath catching a little to find Shio crying softly as Rayla tried to comfort her. Sighing, he stepped closer to them, reaching for Shio and heart catching when she turned away from him. It's okay, sweetheart, Rayla cooed. Your daddy was just a bit worried. He's not angry. Callum looked at her, seeing the worry and concern in her eyes. He reached for her shoulder, squeezing it reassuringly, the anger leaving him seeing Shio scared. Callum is right, Ezran. Soren broke the tense silence. We can't trust Claudia. Callum smiled at him, grateful for his input. No, Opalai spoke up too. She may have helped ultimately defeat Aravos, but she is also partially responsible for his release. She paused briefly and Callum couldn't help but look at Rayla. He was also partially responsible for Aravos' release, wasn't he? Trading the cube for Rayla's life. She's deceived us before. Opalai continued. This could indeed be a rouse to get something more valuable. Callum didn't miss her eyes darting to Shio. Opalai didn't believe this shit about her parentage either, did she? He felt the hair on his arms stand on end as static electricity cracked across his skin, latent magic rising with his temper. Come on. Rayla took his hand, both of them jumping slightly at the jolt that passed from the touch. Let's go back to our rooms. Notes. Oh dear, things going from bad to worse for Raylan. It's not just present-day royals who have rumors going around about them, really, though. What is going on with Kate? I don't even pay attention to this stuff, but the Photoshop madness drew me in. So what is the truth of everything? Where are these rumors coming from and who exactly believes them? What are Raylan going to do with this new information? So many questions. Really though, not a good day at all for Callum and Rayla. Thanks for reading. Any and all comments /emojis /kudos /etc absolutely make my day. As always, constructive criticism is welcome. Hope to see you for more next Wednesday. You can find me on my Tumblr, if you want to be spammed with Raylan and other random things. Chapter 5. Summary. Callum and Rayla talk about the accusations and try to come up with a plan. Notes. Another Wednesday is upon us and we got some cute Raylan content in that week. Bring on WonderCon and hopefully some info on when Season 6 might drop. Nearing the halfway point now. Poor Callum has been through the ringer already. If he didn't hold a grudge against Claudia before, it's probably safe to say he might now. Grimacing face. And just how will Rayla take this accusations? See the end of the chapter for more notes. Chapter text. They exited the throne room, Rayla still carrying Shio. She had perked up a little since Callum had calmed down, but she was still pouting and looking grumpy. She did go to him when he reached for her this time, and he relaxed a little as he held her. Callum sighed, feeling annoyed and frustrated. And also, ashamed. People really thought those things of him. They actually thought he could do that to Rayla. Go behind her back. Betray her and then expect her to raise the result of his affair. His stomach turned once again and he took a deep breath to calm himself as he pulled Shio a little closer against his chest and pressed his lips to her temple. I'm assuming I missed out on a lot. Rayla reached for one of his hands, her head moving in the direction of the dungeons. Care to fill me in? Yeah, of course. Callum nodded, shifting Shio on his hip, his mind still reeling. There's, yeah, a lot. Let's swing by the kitchen and see if Barius has some jelly tarts. Rayla grinned at Shio, then smiled warmly at Callum. I know I need something sweet and delicious to take my mind off that whole mess. And we probably need some treats to keep this little crazy busy while we talk. Barius was unfortunately out of jelly tarts by that time in the evening, but they found themselves back in their rooms with a basket containing some lemon cakes for Shio and croissants, butter and jam for the adults. Giggling in the corner, Shio was enjoying a tea party with Stella and her crocheted toys while Callum and Rayla chose their chairs by the fire. Callum sat with half a croissant in hand, frowning at the flames. His mind was a mess, continually going around and around, thinking back over everything Claudia had said. What did she mean by accusing him of cheating on Rayla? In front of all those people. In front of Rayla. After everything they'd been through, after Claudia in particular had seen what he was willing to do for Rayla, it was inconceivable to him that she would even consider him capable of betraying Rayla like that. I didn't think you'd be that upset by the lack of jelly tarts. He was startled out of his thoughts by Rayla. Looking up, he found her smirking at him. He snorted, glancing at the pastry in his hand before placing it back on the plate and wiping his greasy fingers on his pants. Rayla furrowed her brow and shook her head at him but didn't otherwise comment. He licked his dry lips, not sure how to address what had happened downstairs. Rayla, about what Claudia said about Shio's birth mother. It's bullshit. She shrugged, popping her own piece of croissant in her mouth. I know. You're not. He leaned closer, reaching for her fingers. He couldn't bear the thought that she might have doubts, despite her assurances to the contrary. You believe that, right? You know I would never. Of course, dummy. As if that thought ever crossed my mind. She got out of her chair and squeezed into his next to him. That's not who you are. You're an amazing dad and husband. I know Claudia is just working some angle. Callum sighed, pulling her against him, his hands tight around her waist. He still felt tightly wound, tense. None of this made any sense. What though? I don't know. Rayla slumped into his arms, but you're right. We can't trust her. I know EZ's heart is in the right place, but this is Claudia. Her staffs might have been destroyed, but she's still dangerous. She's betrayed you both before. And she might have helped us defeat Orovos, but she didn't do it out of the goodness of her heart or because she'd seen the light or whatever. Leaning back, she looked at him. She did that for Soren. Furrowing her brow and frowning at the fire, she continued. I cut off her leg. I pushed Viren off the storm spire. Everything that happened after was because of me. No, Callum rolled his eyes. Everything that happened was because of what Viren did. Because he took ZYM's egg and kept it from everyone. Taking a deep breath, he paused. And Harrow too. He let his anger and hurt over my mother's death consume him. Avizandum killed my mother, but Harrow also chose to continue the cycle. He didn't stop Viren when he proposed killing ZYM. Tucking a lock of hair behind her ear, he continued. You began the pushback, Rayla. You let Marcos go. You saw ZYM's egg for what it was, a chance at peace. You began breaking the cycle. I'm not sure that's particularly accurate. Chuckling, she leaned forward, pressing her forehead against his. But some dummy started debating me when I had a sword at his throat. Smiling softly, she sighed. That sort of thing makes an impression. That was all part of my grand plan. Callum smirked, pulling her closer. Despite everything, Rayla always had a way of making him feel better. Whatever they were facing, they'd be doing it together. Woo the assassin and make peace across the continent. Double win. Aha! Rayla rolled her eyes. Well, aren't you the charmer? Clearly. Callum forced a smile, Claudia's accusation worming its way back into his consciousness. What? Rayla sat up a little straighter, reading his change in mood immediately. It's nothing, he sighed, wrapping his arms around her waist and pressing his face into her neck. This whole thing made him feel sick, but he also knew Rayla. Even after all these years, it wasn't unlike her to push down her own discomfort, her own pain. Especially if she thought the truth would hurt him in some manner. Callum. Rayla held him tight, gentle fingers stroking his back. Come on. What Claudia said earlier, he leaned back, eyes searching hers. His stomach was tied in knots at the thought Rayla might have fears or suspicions about him and his faithfulness. If you want to talk about it. Her face softened as she cupped his cheek. What, do I think you were sneaking off with some Skywing elf, secretly knocked her up, have her go into labor as we're on our way to her village, convince the village to pretend she was human, find a way for me to happen upon the baby and manage to keep all of that under wraps for over 3 years. She smiled at him a touch condescendingly. I hope you're not insulted when I say I don't think you could pull that off. Callum snorted, nodding softly. Not just Shio though, I would never. I know that, Callum. Even if you could, even if you were some master illusionist, I know you wouldn't. Rayla's fingers gently stroked his jaw. I know you'd never do anything like that. So, what, you think Claudia is trying to get between us? Just making this all up? He sighed, hating even discussing this with Rayla. He couldn't fathom what plan would necessitate some kind of outlandish rumor like this. Claudia had always been a bit unusual though. Trying to figure out her way of thinking had never been easy, even when they were kids. Why? She shrugged, her eyes dropping. She's not making it up, Callum, but I wouldn't put it past her to exploit it. What do you mean? Callum's heart dropped, as he sat up a little straighter. People, like actual normal people, really believe I would do that. This ridiculous rumor wasn't something Claudia had dreamed up. Rayla took his hand, squeezing his fingers. Callum, people believe all sorts of weird things about public figures. You told me Scene has a thing for goats. He does. Callum insisted before remembering himself. But this is just. I don't see why people would think that. She couldn't be serious. Rayla shrugged. It happens in royal families in some places, right? If the couple can't have a baby, then usually the consort makes some sort of exit until an heir is produced. I guess people in Catullus are a bit different, but maybe not that different. So, what? People think I just shacked up with random women until I got one pregnant. And then expected you to raise the baby. Callum could feel himself flush with anger. Rayla's eyes darted to Shio, who had momentarily stopped playing to watch them. It's okay, sweetie. She smiled tightly, turning to Callum once Shio had resumed play. It's not about you, Callum. She reached for him. It's just that it's a thing. And you knew people were saying this and said nothing. Callum struggled to keep his voice low. Why would Rayla keep this from him? Because I know it's bullshit and that you'd just react like you are now. Rayla hissed, eyes darting to Shio. You can't do anything about stupid rumors. It's better to just ignore them. Ignore them. Callum spat through gritted teeth, eyes darting to Shio. He could feel the air in the room begin to stir, static tickling his skin. He needed to keep his temper in check. Shio wasn't exactly aware of her connection to the Sky Arcanum, but disruptions in the atmosphere were clearly something she could sense. What else are you going to do? Rayla rolled her eyes. Throw everyone thinking them in the dungeon with Claudia. Make it taboo for people to even mutter behind closed doors. That'll make it worse, Callum. She sighed, her face softening a little. People will find something else to gossip about. They always do. He huffed, frowning at his inability to control the situation. Us, for example. Remember the uproar when we announced our engagement? She smirked at him, perhaps remembering how the pushback to their obvious relationship suddenly becoming official had resulted in a number of protests and angry scrolls. And how he'd responded by being more publicly affectionate with her. Until she told him to knock that off. Rayla smiled as he seemed to relax a fraction. They got over you marrying a barren elf, didn't they? He frowned again, hating hearing those words from her. We don't even know it has anything to do with you. Callum insisted, looking at her earnestly. It could be me. There's no way to know. I know. Rayla smiled a little sadly. It could be there's nothing the matter with either of us. Halflings are far more rare than full-blood children. You don't have to keep reassuring me. I know the rumors here are it's me, and if we lived in Zadia I'm sure elves would think you're the problem. We are not a problem. Callum snapped, careful to keep his voice low. I know, Rayla said slowly, carefully, her eyes fixed on his. That's not what I'm saying. I'm just saying I understand why people are saying what they are saying about me. Rayla. And I don't care about any of it. She continued unperturbed. They can say what they want about me, about us. You and Shio are all I need. And we wouldn't have her in our lives if we had our own blood children. She smiled softly at him. So, people can say what they want about us, because having her is worth it. Taking a deep breath, Callum embraced her again. You're right. He looked over her shoulder to where Shio was still playing happily. His attention was getting diverted. This was more important than him and some perception of dishonor. His daughter was in danger. Whatever angle Claudia is working, we need to ensure she's safe. The other halflings too, Rayla sighed. They don't have anything like the protection Shio has. We should offer them sanctuary. Yeah, probably. Ez is sending crows now. He responded dismissively, pausing for a moment while contemplating his next words. He hadn't really spared a thought for other halflings, and it was almost impossible for him to do so now that Shio was apparently a particular target. We should still think about leaving though. Leaving? Rayla frowned at him. You still think it's the best option? Where would we go? If what Claudia said is true, if dark mags actually think there's something different about her specifically, then we should go into hiding. Take Shio and bring her to the Nexus, or the Silver Grove, or some other concealed moon shadow settlement. He watched the confusion wash over Rayla's face. We need to keep her safe. What about the other halflings in the kingdom? Do we just let them get taken? Used. She shook her head, clearly warring with herself. Callum, I don't care about the other halflings. Callum snapped, not particularly surprised by her reaction. Good-hearted, Ethery had called her and he'd been right. She was clearly trying to think of some possible way they could protect everyone. He couldn't think like that though. Or rather, he didn't want to. I care about you and my daughter. I'll do anything to keep you both safe. Rayla sighed, reaching for his hand. Callum, you're the Crown Prince and Hymage of Katolis, you can't just run away at a time like this. Ezran needs you. Ez will understand. Callum insisted, resisting her attempts to calm him. He'll want Shio safe. Ez has a duty to his people, Callum. Rayla looked at him earnestly. You've already seen that. Callum took a breath to object, but Rayla spoke quickly. We don't even know what their plan is. Why they've taken the halflings or how Claudia got them back. We played into our enemy's hands once before, what if fleeing is part of this plan? What can these dark mags possibly be to Orovos? Callum sighed, actively trying to ignore the niggle of doubt deep in his belly. Probably nothing, in the grand scheme of things. Rayla worried her lip, looking pensive. But Callum prompted, trying to catch her eye. If they are interested in halflings, Shio specifically, even if it's a mistake or confusion. She swallowed, her eyes filling with tears. Losing her voice cracked, and she took a deep breath. I know. Callum pulled her into his arms again, pushing those thoughts from his head. I don't know if leaving is the right choice, but I feel like it's better than staying here. Than doing nothing. He leaned back, looking her directly in the eye. I don't want Claudia in the same building as Shio. The Nexus then? Rayla suggested, glancing over her shoulder at Shio. At least initially. Maybe further into Zadia. Callum nodded, feeling just a fraction better. They were leaving, putting some distance between themselves and whatever the hell was going on. I'll speak to Ez in the morning, let him know we're going. You can handle packing. Rayla snorted, rolling her eyes. Don't I always? Notes. Well, they've got a plan. Is it the best one or should they stay where they are? How's Ezran going to take this decision too? Not a fun time for, well, anyone. In particular Rayla, who's been tasked with packing for a trip with a toddler. Never fun. Thanks for reading and hope to see you next week. Thanks for reading. Any and all comments /emojis /kudos /etc absolutely make my day. As always, constructive criticism is welcome. Hope to see you for more next Wednesday. You can find me on my Tumblr, if you want to be spammed with Raylan and other random things. Chapter 6. Summary. Callum prepares to break the news to Ezran, but will all go according to plan. Notes. Officially halfway through and things are going, well, okay-ish. See the end of the chapter for more notes. Chapter text. Mama. Callum cringed as Shio sat up in bed and called out to Rayla. Hey sweetie, let Mama sleep, alright. He hopped on one leg, pulling up his trousers as he made his way over to the bed. I'm awake. Rayla yawned as she sat up, rubbing her eyes and looking around. Sorry. Callum grabbed a tunic and pulled it over his head. He had dressed in comfortable traveling gear, a sleeveless undershirt that made casting midge-wings simple, and rough trousers for riding. They needed to be prepared for all eventualities. Traveling with a near 3-year-old wasn't easy at the best of times and they'd need to avoid unnecessary stops. He'd have to ensure they had more than enough sweet treats from barriers to distract Shio as much as possible. It's fine. I woke earlier, actually. I'm surprised I managed to get back to sleep with this little monster sleeping on my head. Swinging her legs over the side of the bed, Rayla tickled Shio's sides before she got to her feet. You should have woken me so I could finish packing. It could be a long few days. Callum walked over to her, taking her hands. I thought it made sense to let you rest. Thanks, Callum. She smoothed his hair, smiling sadly at him. You're going to speak to Ez? He nodded, sighing. Every minute they were here he felt defenseless. Exposed. He wanted to get moving, to feel like he was doing something active to protect his family. Yeah, I don't want to waste any more time. Rayla took a deep breath, her brow furrowed. You still want to go? Callum's eyes drifted to Shio, who was giggling with Stella on the bed. They looked so sweet and innocent, not a care in the world. Such a stark contrast to what he and Rayla were discussing. Rayla shrugged, looking to Shio too. I'm still confused. I wish I could know if we're making the right choice by leaving. It feels better than doing nothing, doesn't it? Callum squeezed her fingers. He hated feeling useless, like he could do nothing but wait on the danger to reveal itself. He couldn't even study. Over the years, he'd read every book the library had on magic, dark and primal. Whatever was at play here felt new, experimental. Even more dangerous by being unknown. He felt like a sitting duck, open and exposed. It feels better than being here, with Claudia. Even if she's not involved, I can't stand the way she looks at Shio. Or you. Rayla furrowed her brow, looking confused. What do you mean? Geez, it's always been like you weren't a person to her. You were just the elf or a collection of parts. Rayla snorted humorlessly. I don't know, what's the deal with Terry then? I didn't expect to see them still together. Terry is just some exception, I guess. Callum shook his head dismissively. He'd never understood what was going on there and now didn't seem like any better a time to puzzle it out than previous. Anyway, I don't care about Terry or whatever is going on there. I only care about you both and how she's treated you in the past. I want you and Shio far away from her. I can look after myself, you know. Rayla smirked at him. I know. Callum sighed, leaning forward to press his forehead against hers. Of course Rayla was more than capable a fighter, it was just that, when it came to dark magic, there were too many unknowns. She and Shio were more than potential victims in whatever was going on. They were prey to a dark mage. But I'd rather you not have to. I'd rather you live the relaxed life of a duchess, with not a care in the world. Well, that sounds boring. Rayla teased, smiling wider. I'm going to start packing immediately. See, I knew I could convince you to leave. Callum kissed her, then took a step back, smoothing his clothes. I'll get breakfast sent up to you. You just concentrate on packing. Callum, I'm sure it's safe for us to go to breakfast. Rayla walked after him as he made his way to the door. Shio's going to want to say bye to Ez and Soren. The less people know we're leaving, the better. Callum paused at the door, eyes drifting to Shio for a moment. Maybe he was being overly cautious, but Ezran would understand. Shio too. What was more important was safety and secrecy. I don't want to make a scene. We should tell people we're going out to the countryside for the day. Maybe to the ponds. If anyone comes looking for us, that'll send them in the opposite direction. It might give us time. Rayla frowned at him, nodding softly. What? Stopping, Callum turned to give her his full attention. He could see how conflicted she was about this whole thing, warring with herself. I just really hope we're overreacting, that's all. She rubbed her temple. Me too. Callum opened the door, pausing in the threshold. Maybe they were fleeing for nothing. Maybe this would all blow over and they'd come back to annoyance and disapproval. He was willing to weather that storm though. But I'd rather overreact, than the alternative. Dada, where are you going? He looked down to find Shio pouting up at him, her chubby little arms crossed over her chest. I'm going to talk to Uncle Ez, sweetie. He crouched down beside her, taking her hands and squeezing her fingers. Brekkie. Shio clapped happily. Pancakes. She looked between him and Rayla, her dark eyes wide and pleading as she ran to the door. Okay, pancakes. Callum glanced at Rayla, laughing as she rolled her eyes and nodded her head. But I need you to help Mama with packing because we're going on a trip as soon as I get back. A trip? Shio asked, her little brow furrowed. Yep, just me and you and your mama. Callum forced a smile, trying to look excited about the day ahead. He definitely felt like they were making the right choice by leaving, but he wouldn't relax until they made it to the Nexus at the very least. Yeah. Jumping happily, Shio pulled the door open, clearly getting ready to sprint down the hall. Hey. Callum caught her around the middle, swinging her into his arms and trying to distract her from her escape. It's a special morning, so your pancakes are coming here. He nodded enthusiastically at her, trying to get her excited by the idea. Pancakes here? Xiao seemed confused by the idea, pondering for a moment. Thank you, Dada. She threw her arms around his neck, giggling happily. I love you in the whole world. Callum smiled ruefully at Rayla. Me, or the pancakes? Callum hurried over to the stables, peering inside. Initially, he'd planned on seeing Ezran immediately, but he didn't want to waste any time, and assuming things went according to plan, Rayla and Xiao would be ready to leave as soon as he finished his conversation with Ez. If they were lucky, they could get on the road early and put a decent distance between them and the castle before they were forced to camp for the night. Hello. He strode into the building, looking this way and that. Normally he'd try and at least make some kind of small talk with the squires, but he didn't have time today. A moment later a man popped his head out of one of the stalls, looking surprised to have been interrupted. Your Highness. Hi. Callum strode over to him. I need my horse and the Shadow Paw fed, watered and ready as soon as possible. The Shadow Paw? The man repeated, looking confused. Callum frowned at him, not in the mood for delays. He seemed older than most of the squires, perhaps he was a bit dim. Or new. Callum didn't recognize him, but he tended to fly more often than he used his horse. Yes, the Zadian animal. He pointed towards the end of the stable where Io was peering over the stall door. Like I said, I need them ready immediately. Of course, Your Highness. The man bowed, dropping whatever he was doing and making his way down to the far corner of the stable. Satisfied he had that task complete, Callum took a deep breath and set off for the throne room. He couldn't put it off any longer, he needed to speak to Ez. Callum sighed as he paused outside the breakfast room. Faced with the immediate prospect of telling Ezran they were leaving, he felt twitchy, anxious. It didn't matter what Ez said, nothing would convince him to stay now, but he really hoped his brother understood his position. Callum had always been a better brother than a member of the council, he was well aware of that. He found most discussion boring, and while age and maturity had helped him appear more interested in whatever topics were being discussed, he often had to rely on Rayla to fill him in on exact details. If it wasn't a subject that interested him, his mind tended to wander. He did feel guilty leaving his little brother to handle whatever the hell was going on, but not guilty enough to potentially put his daughter and wife at risk. Ezran would understand that. Taking a deep breath, he pushed the door open and stepped inside. Ezran, Soren and Corvus were seated at the table, talking quietly. The atmosphere was tense, oppressive, compared to most mornings. Callum Ezran paused as their eyes met, clearly taking in Callum's casual state of dress. Dropping the jelly tart in his hand, he swallowed noticeably. Rayla and Xiao aren't coming to breakfast. Callum shook his head, striding over to join them. He glanced at the chair, not feeling like he wanted to sit, but electing to. Maybe it would make him seem more conflicted about things if he didn't look like he was ready to bolt at any second. They're eating in our rooms. He paused for a moment, eyes darting to Soren and Corvus. For their part, they looked uncomfortable, clearly guessing this was likely to be a tense conversation. Callum took a deep breath, not knowing how to ease into the discussion and so deciding not to beat around the bush. Ez, we're going to be leaving today. Ezran blinked, looking unsurprised. Going where? Callum hesitated. It wasn't that he didn't trust Ezran with that information, but dark mags had all kinds of ways of manipulating people, tricking them. Of course, Ez would likely guess they'd be going to the Nexus, at least at first, but the fewer people who knew their plans the better. We're going to hide Xiao until this all blows over. Ezran nodded, eyes darting to Soren and Corvus. You don't think she's safer here? In the castle? Callum chewed his lip, truly not sure. My gut tells me she's safer hidden. Hidden far away. Callum tried to keep his temper under control. He didn't have time to answer Ezran's questions, and even if he did, they wouldn't change his plans. Before Ezran could respond, there was a knock on the door, and a moment later, without waiting for a response, a guard stepped inside. Callum frowned, recognizing her as the guard who interrupted him and Rayla the other day. Someone needed to school her on protocol. She seemed to have no idea how out of line it was to continually interrupt like she was. Forgive me, Your Majesty. The guard peered around the door. The prisoner requests an audience. Can't you see we're busy? Callum glared at her. How dare she interrupt their conversation again? Claudia and her requests could wait. Ezran raised a hand to placate him. Tell her I'll be down in the dungeon at some point today. The guard cringed, moving from one foot to another. I beg your pardon, Your Majesty, but we thought it easier if we brought her to the throne room. You've freed a dark mage in the castle. Callum got to his feet, his chair screeching loudly on the flagstones. She's shackled, Your Highness. The guard seemed to think this a sufficient apology. That doesn't matter. Callum advanced on her. Have you any idea how dangerous she is? Callum, calm down. Ezran hurried over, Soren and Corvus behind him. Let's see what she has to say. He gestured for the guard to lead the way, wiping crumbs off his tunic. See what she has to say in the dungeon, Ez. Callum insisted, following them all. Ezran glanced at him, making a calming motion with his hand. What's your name? He asked the guard, his voice soft and kind. She blinked, clearly caught by surprise. Dori, Your Majesty. I don't think I've seen you before, Dori. Ezran gestured for her to continue. I've just been posted to the castle. Dori explained, adjusting her helmet as she resumed walking towards the throne room. Was on the Duran border until last week, Your Majesty. Ezran nodded, smiling at her. Typically, things are a bit more formal here. I'll remember that, Your Majesty. She winced, bowing as she stood back and waiting for the guards either side of the throne room door to let them in. Callum rolled his eyes at this explanation, catching Soren's eye. The head crown guard nodded knowingly at him, and Callum assumed he'd take care of ensuring the new recruits were suitably trained once they were posted here. He didn't have time to be worrying about this now, but he was sure he could trust Soren, Corvus and Opalai to follow up on things. Ezran, he called out, stepping to the side and indicating for Soren, Corvus and Dori to go on ahead. Hey, Ezran sighed, standing to the side. Hopefully this won't take long, and then if you really think you should go. I'm not going to this, Callum responded quickly. Rayla was already packing, and their mounts would be waiting. Whatever Claudia had to say could be conveyed in a scroll. Truthfully, he didn't even want to look at her, still beyond furious by what she'd accused him of yesterday. Callum, at least listen to what she has to say. Ezran tried to appease him. It might make you feel better. Callum gaped at him, struggling not to snap. What could Claudia have to say that would make me feel better? Well, maybe she has more information on why the Dark Mags are looking for halflings. She said they're looking for Shio specifically. Callum wanted to grab Ezran and shake some sense into him. What more do I need to know? I don't know, but having the High Mage around to listen would be helpful, you know. Ezran was clearly losing his temper too. Then I'll resign as High Mage. Callum snapped. His family was more important than some title. Ezran's face fell. Callum. You heard what she said about me. Callum glared at the door for a moment, then looked back to Ezran. She's spreading rumors I went behind Rayla's back, that I betrayed her. I don't give a fuck what else Claudia has to say. Callum, no one believes that. I don't care. Callum took a breath as he felt static electricity crackle in the air. His stomach was tied in knots, and the only way he was going to feel even marginally better was by putting as much distance between his family and Claudia as he possibly could. I cannot listen to her say this shit. I can't listen to how this rumor not only paints me like a fiend, it's also endangering my daughter. Do you not get that, Ez? You're going to let this rumor blind your judgment. What if Claudia has some valuable information? What if she can help us? Ezran seemed to be struggling with his control too, taking a moment as his voice began to rise. You're going to let your pride stop you from learning everything we can. My pride. Callum snarled. My brain, Ez. He shook his head, having had some form of this conversation with Ezran multiple times over the years. I get that you want to think the best of people. Rayla was right all those years ago, you do have a good heart, but sometimes it blinds you. He sighed, assuming he would once again fail to convince Ezran to trust him and no longer caring to. All he wanted to do was go to Rayla and Shio. I know we knew Claudia as kids. I know you want to believe she can change, but I'm not like you, Ez. I can't forgive her for what she's done. I don't want to give her another chance. Not now. Not when I have so much to lose. Ezran sighed, his face falling. He looked down the hall, clearly contemplating. I understand, Callum. I do. Eyes on the spectacular stained glass window at the end of the corridor, he took a deep breath. If you really want to leave, if you want to resign as Highmage, I'll support that. His eyes turned to Callum, wide and imploring. But do me a favor and just listen to what Claudia has to say now. Give me one last counsel. Please. Notes. Well, it's taking a bit of effort to get going, isn't it? WonderCon on the weekend, so we might have some Season 6 news by next update. How exciting. Thanks for reading. Any and all comments /emojis /kudos /etc absolutely make my day. As always, constructive criticism is welcome. Hope to see you for more next Wednesday. You can find me on my Tumblr, if you want to be spammed with Raylan and other random things. Chapter 7. Summary. Claudia begins to explain more of what she knows, but will this information put Callum's concerns to rest or make them worse? Notes. Well, still no release date from WonderCon, but I'm hyped all the same. Thanks to everyone who commented /kudos /tagged the previous chapter. It's always so fun reading your thoughts and theories. See the end of the chapter for more notes. Chapter text. As they had been told, Claudia was waiting for them in the throne room, Terry just behind her. They were both in shackles, their wrists and legs secured together and then by a long chain around their waists. Callum glanced at Dory, who smiled weakly at him. While they certainly looked secure, he didn't trust Claudia or any dark mage. He knew better than anyone that chains posed little more than an inconvenience to a well-prepared dark mage. Hi Ezran. Claudia smiled, her tone and demeanor totally at odds with her bound state. Callum resisted the urge to correct her, to insist she use Ezran's proper title. He didn't have time for that. He was only here to appease Ezran. Better get whatever this was over and done with quickly, so they still had plenty of daylight to travel in. Claudia. Terry. Ezran nodded at them as he walked by, pausing for a moment before he sat in his throne. You have some information for us. Yes, that's why we came. Claudia certainly appeared to be trying to look convincing, shuffling around a little to give Ezran her full attention. You said yesterday that you think you know why the Dark Mags were looking for halflings. Ezran frowned, taking a deep breath. Claudia shrugged, glancing at Terry. Since the borders opened, since humans and elves have been mingling, coming in contact with each other, there have been rumors. Rumors. Ezran looked at Callum, then back to Claudia. Half-breeds are born with magic, right? But they are also human. Claudia spoke hurriedly, like she always did when she got excited. So, they cross a kind of bridge. Part human but born knowing an arcanum. We don't even know if that's true of all halflings. Callum couldn't help but interrupt her. It wasn't like he knew that many halflings, and most were still too young to know if they properly understood their arcanum or could do magic. There's just the same chance they are born without magic. Claudia continued as if he hadn't spoken, not so much as looking at him. The theory is, if we can tap into that special connection, if we can find a way to understand that, then maybe humans can finally find their own special connection to magic. How exactly do you plan on understanding that connection? Callum walked around, challenging Claudia to look at him. I don't know how they plan on doing it, she scoffed, rolling her eyes. I'm just telling you what I heard. Well, it's obviously something sinister, or they wouldn't have to kidnap a bunch of kids. Callum glared at her, annoyed at her dismissive attitude. Or they don't think elves would want to help them. Claudia arched an eyebrow, looking smug. They weren't exactly chomping at the bit to help humans learn magic before the expulsion from Xadia. So, rather than see if attitudes have changed over thousands of years, Dark Mags think it's a much better idea to kidnap a bunch of kids. Callum looked at Ezran, trying to gauge his reaction. Because that's definitely going to help elves trust humans. Elves don't trust humans anyway. Claudia snapped, even as Terry shifted uncomfortably behind her. Callum scoffed, growing more irritated. Considering the time that had passed, the open borders and sharing of the continent, it seemed pretty obvious many elves trusted humans. Prejudices that had developed and festered for thousands of years wouldn't evaporate overnight, but even the past 10 years clearly showed that things were changing for everyone, human and elf. The halflings themselves were evidence of that. As usual though, dark mags were impatient. Looking for shortcuts and damn the consequences. I don't understand what this has to do with Shio specifically. Ezran spoke up, interrupting what was clearly a growing argument. Callum furrowed his brow, crossing his arms over his chest. He didn't want to discuss his daughter with Claudia anymore. Anyway, he'd heard enough, and this conversation was unlikely to go anywhere. He was going to look for an opportunity to leave, and if none presented themselves, he would do that without waiting. Shio. Claudia turned back to Ezran. Like I said, she's different to other half-breeds. She's not, Callum growled, balling his fists. She's just like the other halflings that were taken. Her biological mother was human and her father a Skywing. Shio was special to him and Rayla, obviously, but not in whatever sick way Claudia or others were thinking. Claudia glanced at him, a slight smirk just detectable on her face. They believe Shio is the true daughter of the first human primal mage in centuries. Not only that, the daughter of the same mage who was possessed by the fallen star, the father of dark magic. Callum swallowed, his blood running cold at the mere mention of Aravo's possession. It gives Callum a unique connection to deep magic. Claudia's voice dropped a little, sounding almost in awe. So, the successful union of such a mage and a creature connected to primal magic, the blood of such a child. Callum shuddered, feeling sick. Stop it. He could barely speak around the lump in his throat. All of this, everything, he wanted to push it from his mind. The worst experience of his life, being possessed by Aravos, controlled, hearing elves referred to as creatures, the focus on Shio's blood, it made him sick to his stomach. The room span around him as he tried to digest what Claudia was saying. None of it made sense, not the reality of it but the lie, the rumor, was more dangerous than anything he could have imagined. Claudia glanced at him for a second but continued unperturbed. They think they can use Shio's blood too. I don't care what they think. Callum shook himself. He needed to get control of his emotions, clear this mess up before it put Shio in any more danger. Can you let me finish? Claudia replied, sounding only impatient, not in any way horrified by what she was explaining. Ezran held up a hand, appearing sympathetic. Callum, if Claudia at least explains what they are thinking, maybe we can come up with a plan. Thank you, Ezran. Claudia replied smugly. Like I was saying, they think they can use her blood to tap into deep magic. Open up the ability for humans to do magic. Humans can do magic. Callum's mind raced, his thoughts no longer focused on the conversation here, attention caught between this discussion and Shio and Rayla upstairs. He needed to get out of here. He needed to go to them and get them all far away. Hidden. Oh, yeah, just be lucky enough to be a prince and have access to a primal stone. Rolling her eyes, Claudia attempted to cross her arms, the motion only half complete due to the heavy chains on her wrists. You have no idea if that's what's needed. He'd spent more time than he could remember trying to figure out exactly how he'd connected to each primal source, wanting to help other humans interested in magic. He assumed, like Claudia had alluded to, it was connected to deep magic. It had all been a mystery though. Neither do you. Claudia snapped, raising her chin defiantly. Callum huffed, rolling his eyes. As he had suspected, this was all just a waste of time. Distracting him from the real issues. Anyway, it doesn't matter. Like I've already told you, if this whole stupid plan is based on the theory Shio is my blood daughter, it's not going to work. She's adopted. He turned, intending on leaving now, trusting Ezran would understand. Claudia sighed long and low, like what he was saying was tedious. Okay then, what if you and Rayla could have a child? Would you consider? Callum was caught off guard, not in any way expecting that. He turned back to look at her. We can't and we wouldn't. Not for some messed up experiment. What was she even suggesting? What the hell is wrong with you? Dark magic can do things primal magic can't. Claudia replied cryptically, her eyes focused on his. I've heard enough. Callum felt his stomach turn, horrified by whatever twisted spell, whatever horrific experiment Claudia might have been contemplating. He turned back to the doors, nodding at Dory to open them. Callum, wait. Ezran rushed after him, though he waved the guards on as they hesitated to follow Callum's silent order. Ushering him out into the hallway, he motioned for the guards to close the doors over. Are you all right? He asked, once they were alone. Callum swallowed past the lump in his throat, feeling his breath come in pants. No, he was decidedly not all right. Somehow, that was even worse than he could possibly imagine. Before he could respond, Ezran put his hands on his shoulders, his face clearly concerned. It's okay, Callum. I'm not going to ask you to listen to any more of that. I'm sorry I did in the first place. I have to go. Callum's voice shook as he instinctively looked towards the hallway that led to his family quarters. Of course. Absolutely. Ezran nodded, frowning. Do you mind if I say goodbye to Shio? And Rayla? Callum took a breath to object. He just wanted to leave now. Not wait any longer. I'll tell them to put Claudia back in the dungeon and leave her there. Ezran spoke hurriedly. I won't be a minute. Taking a deep breath, Callum reluctantly nodded. Shio would be upset if she didn't get to say goodbye to Ezran. And he had no idea when they would see him again. A quick goodbye was probably best. He didn't want to leave the way things had been in the throne room either. Thanks, Callum. Ezran quickly hugged him, turning back to the large doors. I'll be right back. Callum swallowed, his mouth dry. I'll see you in our rooms. Ezran turned, nodding enthusiastically as the doors shut behind him. Taking a deep breath, Callum ran a hand over his face. He took a moment to compose himself, not wanting Rayla to see how deeply upset he was by that whole discussion. The entire thing unnerved him in a way he hadn't thought possible. Not any more than he already had been anyway. Claudia suggesting they could use dark magic to somehow create an actual biological child felt vile though, twisted in so many ways. Not only for the experimental nature of what she was proposing, but what sort of beginning was that for any child? Born, not through love or longing, but created with a goal, a purpose. A destiny of another's choosing. A child created as a tool. Callum shook his head, banishing those thoughts. They didn't bear dwelling on. He needed to regain his focus, continue with the plan they had made and put this entire nightmare behind them. He heard the door open and turned, relieved at least that Ezran had finished up so quickly, then immediately scowling when the clumsy guard, Dory, exited the throne room. She averted her eyes, ducking her head as she hurried around a corner and away from his clear irritation. His rambling thoughts were interrupted by music, a whistle or a flute. Far away, it felt like. Soft, gentle. Like a cradle song from his childhood. Lulling him to sleep. He heard footsteps on the flagstones, his slow mind turning to find Dory rushing towards him. She was accompanied by someone else, the old squire from the stables. What was he doing in the castle? Callum's strength failed him as he collapsed to his knees, his body completely overcome by exhaustion. What was happening? Was he ill? Perhaps all the fear and emotion had proven too much. He looked to the guards, wondering if he should ask them to help him to his room or even get Ezran. To his surprise, they were fixing something in their ears, pulling on hoods. Obscuring their faces as they advanced on him. His heart froze as he suddenly remembered where he knew this music from. Umber Tor. Notes. Well, that didn't exactly end on a good note, did it? Major kudos to Conma who raised concerns about Claudia's flute all the way back in Chapter 3. And I was really happy to see numerous people pick up on the inept, or perhaps not so inept, Palace help. Now, just how is Callum going to get his way out of this one? Chapter 8. Summary. The attack finally comes as Callum and Rayla fight to get their daughter to freedom. Notes. Happy Hump Day, one and all. Any of you lucky enough to have experienced the eclipse, I hope it was awesome. I saw an annular eclipse a couple of years ago and even that was absolutely amazing. Also saw a transit of Venus via pinhole camera. Also mind-blowing. Space, man. Wow. Thanks everyone who commented /q-reblogged the last chapter and on the fic so far. The wheels are finally in motion. Apologies, but I think I'll have to progress to fortnightly updates from here. Having a bit of funny brainworms with fic writing, unfortunately. I'll be updating my other ongoing work, Purgatory fortnightly too, so slight decrease in frequency here and increase there. See the end of the chapter for more notes. Chapter text. Ventus subsistio. Callum quickly drew a rune and the world fell silent. Taking a deep breath, he tried desperately to harness his connections to primal magic. In this hallway, ocean and moon seemed far away. Distant. There was a slight stirring of a breeze along the hall though, and without the aid of his staff, that would have to do. Aspiro. He drew the runes and felt his mouth speak the words, but the air remained quiet and still. The two figures approaching him were knocked off their feet, ill-prepared it would seem. Before they could recover, Callum rushed forward, grabbing the sword from Dory as he kicked her harshly in the chest. Before she could react, he swung around driving his steel into the chest of the old squire. Or the dark mage who disguised himself as an old squire. The man visibly gasped, his hand still in his pocket, reaching desperately for some dark magic ingredient. Kicking him to the ground, Callum spun once again, turning to face Dory. Without the aid of his hearing, he braced himself for some unknown attack. She was still getting to her feet though and once again Callum kicked her, sending her reeling back until she collided with the throne room doors. The guards who normally stood to attention were slumped on the ground, having clearly succumbed to the sleeping spell. Aspiro Frigis. The blast of ice wasn't anywhere near what he'd hoped for, but it pinned Dory to the door and hopefully helped secure it too. Callum didn't have time to dwell on that though. He shook himself, trying to force his mind awake. Ever since Claudia had tricked them with that damn flute at Umbertor, he'd researched ways of combating the spell. From his reading, he was pretty sure he knew which spell she'd used. All he needed to fight it was to stop the sound vibrations getting to his ears and into his mind, but he'd never had the chance to test the theory. He couldn't risk waiting around to see if it would withstand it either. Without hesitation, he broke into a run, sprinting as fast as he could to his rooms. The lack of sound to guide him was disconcerting, but he couldn't risk dropping the spell, not with whatever was going on with the flute. Busting through the doors to their quarters, Callum's heart shuddered to find Rayla and Shio slumped over, fast asleep. They had clearly been reading a book, Shio's little body lying across the crumpled pages. He rushed over to them, shaking Rayla in an attempt to wake her. Her head lolled around as she resisted his efforts. Rayla. He had no idea how loudly he was speaking, his own voice merely a feeling in his throat and skull. Rayla, wake up. He wondered if the spell was still at work, those treacherous notes lulling her back to sleep, even as he fought to wake her. Quickly drawing the required rune, he watched the mark dissolve into the air and hoped desperately it worked. Rayla's eyelids fluttered a little and she blinked at him for a moment, her mouth moving slowly. Callum had never really attempted lip reading before and he found he had no idea what she was saying, beyond what seemed to be his name. He didn't want to risk dropping the hearing shield spell though and so he opted to sign. Attack. Rayla could communicate well enough through sign language, but only really about everyday things. He had no idea if she would understand anything more detailed than the fact they needed to leave, and he didn't have time right now to explain anyway. He gestured between the three of them. Run. Her eyes grew wide, and she nodded, clearly understanding enough. Trusting him. Her hands lingered over her ears, and she looked at him for reassurance. They'd spoken of this spell before, but years ago and he wondered if she remembered it. Taking a deep breath, she shook her head, as if adjusting to this new reality. She nodded at him, getting to her feet. Callum picked up Shio, swallowing as she didn't even react. Rayla was up and moving though, pulling out drawers and he was trying to figure out how to tell her they didn't have time to pack when she rushed over to him, Shio's wrap in her hand. Without comment, he held Shio against his chest as Rayla worked quickly to secure her in place. He felt her pull the ends of the wrap tight and tuck them in before she came back around the front and checked Shio was secure. Nodding at him, she squeezed his hand for a moment, handing him his staff as she pulled her blades from her back and they turned towards the door. Rayla's lungs burned as they raced through the halls. A cold sweat beaded down her back. Her eyes searched endlessly, and she mourned the lack of hearing. And her inability to effectively communicate with Callum. She had no idea what was actually going on, but she didn't doubt for a second it had to do with Claudia and dark magic. That haunting music had seemed so familiar, and the next second, she found herself unable to keep awake. She certainly remembered that. Callum led the way, but she already knew where he was going. To the battlements. Specifically, the ones in the far corner of the castle, that area, a strange pattern of air currents that allowed him to climb higher and faster than launching from one of the windows of this level. She hoped the added height and speed once airborne was worth the risk of running through the castle, but she trusted Callum knew what was going on better than she did. They rounded a corner and ran into a group of soldiers, all armed but looking confused and directionless. She saw more than one of them relax somewhat as they recognized them. One of them stepped forward, clearly speaking quickly, though Rayla heard nothing but eerie silence. She turned to see Callum drawing a rune and suddenly the sound returned. It was so unexpected and shocking, she found herself clasping her hands over her ears, sounds seemingly incredibly loud after only a few minutes of absolute silence. "What did you say?" Callum asked, eyes darting around the hallway. "I said we are relieved to see you, Your Highnesses," the guard apparently repeated, looking a little confused. "Have you been awake the entire time?" Callum asked hurriedly, his hand mindlessly shifting his staff. "Awake?" The guard looked back at the others. "Yes, Your Highness." "Of course. You didn't hear any music or anything?" Callum took a step towards the group. "No, Your Highness." The guard replied, looking increasingly worried by Callum's strange behavior. "If I may, what is happening, Hymage?" "The castle is under attack." Callum spoke without mincing his words. "From dark mags. They've likely incapacitated everyone in the throne room, maybe even that entire wing. We have to leave." He pushed past them, beginning to pick up speed once again. The guard followed, along with the party. "You're going to get help, Your Highness." Callum glanced at the guard, then at Rayla. "The dark mags are here for halflings. We have to get Shio to safety." "What shall?" Before the guard could finish, there was an eerie cry and a warm breeze rushed by them, followed by a dark shadow that obscured the morning light streaming in through the window at the end of the hall. They all turned, looking back down the hallway, the light lasting just long enough for them to make out a group of people in dark hoods stalking them. "Go." Callum grabbed Rayla's hand, the two of them setting off at full sprint down the hall. Rayla glanced behind her quickly, wondering what the guards were doing. They would be no match for dark mags, they needed to run too. To her dismay, they were engaging the mags, though she could barely make out what was happening. The sound of metal on metal, cries and shouts. An occasional flash. And then nothing, no more sounds of fighting or conflict. She turned from the scene, concentration solely on escape now. She and Callum were both quick, but the dark mags were quicker, fueled by dark magic and ill-gotten advantages. She could hear their harsh boots thundering after them, the acrid scent of dark magic that seemed to permeate the air wherever they were. They turned a corner and her heart fell to see how far away the battlements were as they raced past a low window. They were going to struggle to make it. She didn't know this part of the castle well, she wasn't sure which room had a large enough window for them to fit through. Turning her head, her breath caught to find the dark mags gaining on them. They were unnaturally fast. They would catch them. "Callum." She glanced at him, unsure if he heard her at first. He turned his head briefly, his eyes questioning. "Go on." Her voice cracked just a little. "You need to get out of here. I'm not leaving you." He glared at her, his face a little contemptuous. "You have to." She gestured to the dark mags, still gaining on them. Now impossibly close. "You have to escape. Fly to the Nexus. To Zadia. Keep Shio safe." Callum's eyes followed hers and he stopped, gripping his staff as he swung it at the hallway and spoke. A Spyro Frigis. A vast ice wall materialized before them, just in time to stop one of the dark mags from reaching them. Callum looked back at her, shaking his head. Rayla, that's ridiculous. He tried to grab her wrist, to pull her along with him. I can take us. The three of us. He couldn't. He couldn't take the three of them, not with the speed needed, and they had to get Shio away. This was the only option. They were too fast. They had dark magic on their side. She needed to hold them off long enough for Callum to put distance between him and the castle. Rayla had seen various ways dark mags could capture someone fleeing through the air. She had to prevent them from getting to the battlements. Callum and Shio needed to be long gone before they even got outside. They wanted Shio and clearly orchestrated this entire thing to get her. Callum couldn't spare the energy to carry Rayla and Shio. He needed to fly fast and direct. Put as much space between Shio and the dark mags pursuing them as possible. Space and illusion. I can give you time. She felt her throat close. Maybe a little. Hopefully enough. Rayla, he tried to argue with her, but she pressed her lips to his, silencing him. You have to get out of here. You know that. She insisted, her eyes darting behind her. On the other side of the ice wall, flashes of light illuminated dark figures. She could see the wall melting, cracking, breaking. They didn't have time for this. Callum shook his head, adjusting Shio in his arms. She still slept soundly, not reacting to the movement or their voices, a testament to the dark magic that had lulled her to sleep. No, Callum's protest was weak. They both knew she spoke the truth. Pushing him away, she turned back to the ice wall, just as the first spell penetrated it and a sneering midge filled the hole left behind. Rayla. Callum was clearly warring with himself, his hands shaking as he reached for her. There's no time, Callum. She pleaded, swiping at the face in the hole. Go. Rayla, please. His voice cracked as she stabbed at the wall. I'll be right behind you. I'll follow you on foot. Rayla glanced over her shoulder briefly. They didn't have time for this. Callum needed to leave, put as much distance between Shio and these dark mags as possible. She tried to sound confident as she nodded at him. I'll see you there. She lied. Callum paused at the door that led to the eastern battlements, trying to calm his breathing. He listened for the sounds of footsteps. Rayla's footsteps. She'd said she'd go to the Nexus on foot though. Perhaps she wouldn't risk coming here. No, of course she wouldn't. She'd try and lead the dark mags in a different direction, protect Shio that way. He needed to go. He needed to make the most of the risk she had taken. But he couldn't bring himself to. Every time he pictured leaving without her, his breath caught in his throat, and he knew he wouldn't be able to perform the Midgewing spell. A moment later, his heart rose as he heard footsteps approaching. Hurried, but not fast. And with an unusual sound to them, like one foot was heavier than the other. Perhaps Rayla was injured. It had to be her, didn't it? He wasn't willing to believe anything else. Pulling the still sleeping Shio close against his chest, he peered down the spiral staircase, hoping desperately to see Rayla's white hair as she hurried to join them. She was right, it would be difficult to fly all of them, but he just needed to get away from the castle. They could travel on foot from there. It would take them longer to get to the Nexus, but they'd get there as a family. He breathed a sigh of relief as a head turned the corner, their hair bright white, even in the low glow of the fading torches. A moment later, relief turned to dread once he realized not all the hair was white, black patches peeking through here and there. He willed himself to run, just as Claudia looked up and made eye contact with him. Callum. He heard her call out as he turned and burst through the door and onto the battlements. Wait, stop. Claudia called after him, but he didn't dare pause to see what she could possibly want. He ran to the edge of the wall that rimmed the battlements, as the door on the far side opened and more robed figures poured onto the walls. Leaping onto the wall, he prayed that he had enough strength of will to perform the wing spell as he plunged off the castle. Notes. Eek, Rayla are really in it now, aren't they? Definitely wishing they had turned and run first thing. Bit of a cliffhanger here, not the greatest week to progress to reduced update frequency, I realize. Smiling face with open mouth and cold sweat. It wasn't planned. Smiling face with open mouth and tightly closed eyes. Chapter 9. Summary. Callum looks for help to rescue Rayla, while she deals with her own issues. Notes. Hello everyone. Thank you so much for your patience with my altered update schedule. At this stage, I do not think I'll likely be able to go back to weekly updates with this fic, though I will try my best. The plot thickens and from here contains some details that, well, I don't want to spoil via tags, but also want to give people the ability to prepare for /opt-out, if they truly would prefer not to read. Do not click if you do not want to be spoiled. Hopefully, this makes sense to all. See the end of the chapter for more notes. Chapter text. The sun was beginning to rise as Callum finally spotted a suitable clearing to rest. He had hoped to make it to the Nexus in one flight, but the winds were against him, and he couldn't focus enough to change them. Alighting on the forest floor, he banished his wings, rolling his stiff shoulders for a moment before he began to undo the ties of Shio's wrap. His hands shook and he told himself it was from the effort of flying. Dada? Shio asked, having been unnaturally quiet the entire time. She normally enjoyed flying, the skywing in her, he assumed, but there hadn't been a giggle or even a murmur from her the entire time. He had felt her wake not long into their flight, but she hadn't spoken. Not once. He wondered if their fearful cries and desperate escape had penetrated her dreams, given her nightmares. He hoped not. Yes, sweetheart. His voice cracked as he pulled the last of the wrap away, slumping to the forest floor as he held her tight against his chest. He felt weak. Empty. He'd tried to control the winds, to get them to the Nexus as quickly as possible, but his mind raced with thoughts of Rayla. Alone, abandoned in the castle. Abandoned by him. Where's Mama? Shio looked up at him, her dark eyes wide and terrified. She's Callum's voice caught in his throat, and he blinked rapidly, trying desperately not to cry and show Shio how utterly terrified he was. His fear and concern for Rayla was like a physical ache, a knife wedged between his ribs, burning more and more with each strangled heartbeat. He couldn't let Shio see how afraid he was. She was pale and trembling, her eyes wide with fear. She had to stay behind, sweetie. Why? Shio sniffed, tears filling her big eyes too. Why, Dada? Callum took a deep breath, unable to answer. Why? Why the fuck had he left Rayla behind? What had he been thinking? A strangled sob escaped his throat, and he ran a hand over his face in an attempt to compose himself. Sources, what would they be doing to her? They wouldn't kill her though. Claudia knew he could be manipulated through Rayla, that he'd do anything for her. They wouldn't kill her. She had to be alive. She had to be. I want Mama. Shio wailed, beginning to cry. He attempted to soothe her, trying to draw her into a hug. He needed to hold it together. His daughter needed him too. I know, sweetheart, but I want Mama. Shio pushed him away, trying to escape his grip. I want Mama. Mama. Shio, stop, we have to be quiet. Callum took her hands, but she continued to try and get away. Shio, stop. It's not safe. Mama. Shio began to kick, crying loudly. Shio, stop. He yelled, fear, desperation and guilt winning out over his patience. She gasped loudly, immediately freezing as she stared wide-eyed at him. His heart clenched and his hands shook as he reached for her, breath catching when she recoiled a little. Shio, he held his hands up, trying to soothe and apologize. Shio, I'm sorry. I shouldn't have yelled at you, his voice cracked, and he felt tears finally leak from his eyes. I'm very worried about your Mama, Shio. And I want to try and help her. Is Mama hurt? Shio began to cry again. She's in trouble, sweetie. He took a deep breath, trying to regain his composure. And I want to help her. He smiled at his daughter, opening his arms to her and relaxing just a fraction when she pressed herself against his chest, her tiny fingers grasping at him. You want to help her too, don't you? Yes, Dada. Shio sniffed, squeezing him a little tighter. That's my girl. Callum forced a smile, wiping the tears from her chubby cheeks. So, I need you to be very brave for me, all right? We need to rest for a little while and then we're going to go see Nanny and Granddad at the Nexus. They help you help Mama. Shio smiled innocently. Nodding, Callum pulled her in close. They will. She ran through the castle, elated to be home. To see Callum. It felt like forever since she'd seen him, when even was the last time they were together. Pushing open the door to their room, she already knew something was wrong. Off. A moan from the bed, low and lustful. She stopped dead in her tracks, her blood running cold. The intruder sighed, running her fingers through Callum's thick hair, pulling him closer, groaning obscenely. His olive skin was a stark contrast to the grey tones of hers, and all Rayla could see was skin. He was kissing her passionately, hedonistically. So incredibly caught up in her, in what they were doing, that he didn't even register the open door. Rayla's breathless horror at what she was witnessing. Her stomach lurched at the sight of them, vision swimming as it felt like her blood was freezing in her veins once again. The pain all-encompassing, everywhere. Oh sources, Callum, how could he? She felt tears well up in her eyes, a harsh lump in her throat as her heart thundered painfully in her chest. Her legs grew weak, unable to support her in her state of shock, and she crashed to her knees, crying out painfully as she connected with the solid flagstones. Callum and the other women looked around as she did so, both of their faces falling to find they were not alone. Rayla. Callum's eyes were wide, staring, as the woman he was with pulled the sheets around her chest in a vain attempt to shield her nakedness. I thought you would be at the Nexus for another night. She sobbed at his words, hand coming up to cover her face as a sudden wave of nausea almost overwhelmed her. It's not what it looks like, he explained, scrambling around for his underwear, she assumed. Rayla looked away, unable to think properly as her body began to shake uncontrollably. She wanted nothing more than to run away from the agony of what she had just witnessed, but her body betrayed her, unable to move from where she was slumped on the floor. It's Callum approached her, his modesty hidden by underclothes. I just know how much you want a baby, and you can't, so. She looked at him, trying to figure out what on earth he was talking about. I just thought you wanted a baby so badly and you couldn't, so he was crying too. I never blamed you, Rayla. I never held it against you. I thought you'd understand. She looked at him, trying to make sense of what he was saying. She didn't understand. He'd always said that they, the two of them were enough. That he didn't resent the fact they couldn't have their own children. He'd never blamed her, never once let her accept responsibility for the years of trying unsuccessfully to have their own child. There was no way of knowing, he'd argued. Elves and humans were lucky to have children. It didn't mean there was anything wrong with either of them. Maybe it wasn't just meant to be. And then they'd found a baby, hadn't they? It was foggy and unclear, time-muddled and wrinkled. Shio, their daughter, a skywing human halfling, recently orphaned. Or so she thought. Maybe not, maybe not. Was this a memory? Something she'd buried deep inside? Rayla squeezed her eyes shut. No, that made no sense. Callum would never deceive her like that, never betray her. She knew people thought these ridiculous things, but she knew there was no possibility they were true. This was some awful nightmare. Some illusion. She looked back at him, his concerned and sorrowful face shifting and swaying before her eyes. This wasn't real. It couldn't be. Callum watched Shio sleep, her small body curled up around his arm. She looked so beautiful. Peaceful. As if the horrors of the past few hours hadn't happened. He wished so desperately they hadn't. Or that he could have better shielded her from them. A child her age should never have had to witness such things. He hoped desperately she'd slept through all of it. If only he'd acted sooner. Sent her and Rayla away when the threat had first arisen. Or better yet, left with them. Protected his family and to hell with everyone else. Rayla would never have agreed to that though, not initially. She'd have wanted to do the right thing, to do what they could to recover the halflings before she'd have agreed to leave themselves. Even after everything that happened, even if she knew it was all fated to turn out like it did, she wouldn't have changed course. It was one of the first things he'd admired about her, her steadfast belief in doing what was right. Right now though, he cursed her for it, even as his heart broke at the thought of her alone back in the castle. Assuming she had survived. No, he couldn't think like that. If Claudia really was so interested in Shio, she'd want to keep Rayla alive. Use her as a bargaining chip or bait like she had before. Claudia likely knew him well enough to know killing Rayla would only enrage him. Leave him with little left to lose. Or so he hoped anyway. He sighed, pulling Shio closer as he tried to get comfortable. He really needed to sleep. They had another full day of flying ahead of them tomorrow, maybe more, depending on the winds. They had neither food nor water and only the clothes on their backs. They needed to get to the Nexus as fast as possible. He could trust Luyan and Alan with Shio while Rayla's parents, Ranan and Etheri, accompanied him back to the castle to rescue her. That was the only way forward now, and while he was typically not enthusiastic about seeing Ranan, he had to admit, 4 Moon Shadow Elves would be invaluable in getting Rayla back safely. She's resisting. Shush, Terry. She's not free. Rayla took a deep breath, the room before her suddenly fading to grey and then back into color, dark and muted but color all the same. She was still in her room, but now. Still tied up. Still at the mercy of Claudia. She's awake, Claudia. With monumental effort, Rayla turned her head, her unfocused eyes falling on Terry, then to Claudia. The dark midge was once again sitting before her, her eyes inky black as they appeared fixated on Rayla. Time seemed to have lost all meaning. It was always confusing, fuzzy, like waking from a dream, but she knew this had happened before. How many times, she couldn't tell. The illusions melted and melded into each other, past, present and future all a jumble. Along with the lies Claudia spun. Damn it, Terry. Claudia fumed, getting to her feet and knocking her chair back. I almost had her that time. She was breaking free, Claudia. It was only a matter of time. Terry watched Rayla for a moment, then turned his attention back to Claudia. You're exhausted. You need to rest. No, there's no more time. Claudia paced, her hands in fists by her side. Callum got away. He's probably stashing the half-breed somewhere in Zadia and then he's going to be coming back for her. He's not going to leave her here. Okay. Terry looked between her and Rayla. So, why don't we talk to him? Send him a crow or something. Explain. Callum is the least likely person to listen to me. Snorting, Claudia put her hands on her hips. You saw how he was before. He didn't even give me a chance. Terry sighed, shaking his head. Maybe if we'd just waited longer or not bothered with the rumor. You'd said yourself it was stupid. Oh, that's so helpful. You have a star primal stone stashed someplace. Maybe we can travel back in time and try that. Claudia resumed her pacing once again. You know this isn't on my timetable. They wanted to move. Terry sighed, frowning as he seemed to think for a moment. He glanced at Rayla, his eyes not quite meeting hers. She won't accept this illusion, Claudia. Terry reached out for her, flinching when she pushed him away. She rejects it every time. Maybe try something else, or, I don't know, try talking to her. You think she's going to listen to me? Help me. Claudia sneered, rolling her eyes. She hates dark magic, Terry. Well, we're giving her good reason, Terry continued to try to appease her, laying a hand on her shoulder. Claudia pushed his hand away, glaring at him. She cut off my leg. Terry's face fell, his eyes darting to Claudia's left leg. I know, love, believe me, I know, it's just. What? Snapping, Claudia crossed her arms over her chest. She didn't look particularly open to discussion. Terry shrugged his shoulders. Maybe your history here is clouding your judgment a little. What do you want me to do? Claudia huffed, pouting childishly. Maybe try talking to Ezran again. Terry nodded, clearly trying to guide Claudia. He seemed open to listening before, maybe if you explain things to him, he might be willing to help. Claudia seemed to consider this, pouting. He can't find the half-breed though, and you know they want her. Ez won't give her up either. No, probably not. Terry took a deep breath, clearly considering his words. But maybe he'd write a letter to Callum explaining the plan. Or he might be able to convince Rayla. They both looked at her and Rayla glared back at them. As if anyone could convince her to let Claudia near her child. At least it'll give you a chance to rest. Terry took Claudia by the hand, guiding her towards the door. See if you can get Ezran to help. Or at least get some food. Maybe you're right. And I am hungry. Claudia sighed, smiling softly at Terry. I wonder if there are any jelly tarts in the kitchen. I haven't had one in so long. That's the spirit. Terry grinned at her, nodding enthusiastically. Claudia kissed his cheek, opening the door as she shrugged and glanced at Rayla. Anyway, she's not going anywhere. Notes. Thank you so much for reading. Poor Callum and Rayla, neither in the very good situations. Where to go from here? They don't tend to fare well if separated. Chapter 10. Summary. Callum finally makes it to the Nexus, while Rayla tries to keep things together in Katolis. Notes. Thanks so much to everyone who read and commented on the previous chapter. The plot thickens, a lot more questions than answers right now. See the end of the chapter for more notes. Chapter text. Callum breathed a sigh of relief as the Nexus came into view, buildings and settlements becoming clear, then people. He alighted in a clearing, paying no attention to the startled moon shadow elves who saw him land. Where's Luyan? He grabbed the closest elf by the upper arm, not caring for their startled gasp. It wasn't Luyan he was looking for, but Rayla's parents were new to this place and may not be well known. Luyan would likely know where they were though. Callum. He turned, sighing a little when he recognized Effery and Lane hurrying towards him. We have to leave. He rushed to meet them, untying Shio's wrap as he did so. What's going on? Lane asked, clearly confused. He looked behind him, beckoning Ranan and Teodrin over. Dark Mags. Callum struggled to catch his breath, having flown as fast as he could, even with the benefit of a conjured tailwind. They attacked the castle. What? Teodrin visibly paled. Where's Rayla? Callum's breath caught in his throat, and his eyes stung. He struggled to find the words, to explain. You left her. Ranan's voice was low and quiet. I didn't leave her. Callum spat, dropping the wrap to the ground and pulling Shio into his arms. She snuggled into him, still uncharacteristically quiet and subdued. The last thing she needed was being scared again. Ranan Teodrin cautioned, Callum would never. She ran back to give us time. So I could get Shio to safety. Callum swallowed past the lump in his throat. The Dark Mags, they're looking for halflings. He glanced down at his daughter, covering her ear, though he doubted any of this made sense to her. For Shio specifically. The four moon shadows exchanged equal looks of horror, stepping a little closer together. Why? Lane reached out and stroked Shio's back. Callum glanced down at Shio, hating so much he had to discuss this again. And worse, to discuss it with Rayla's parents, with Ranan of all people. I'll explain on the road, but we need to leave. Immediately. We have to rescue Rayla. Of course. Teodrin nodded, turning and gesturing behind her. Our weapons are at home though. Callum and Shio ate while the four elves gathered their things. He found he could barely swallow, but he knew he needed his strength if he was going to be in any state to help Rayla. The door swung open and he jumped to his feet as Luyan, followed by Alan, entered. I thought you'd be here. Suri came to find me. Luyan looked around the room. She said a human with wings landed in the square. That he seemed distressed. Is everything all right? Callum shook his head, taking Luyan by the elbow and ushering her to a corner. Keep eating, sweetie, he called over his shoulder to Shio. Turning back to Luyan, he sighed, mind still grappling with everything that had happened in such a short space of time. Have you heard rumors here? About Dark Mags? About them looking for halflings? Luyan's eyes darted to Shio behind them. We heard whispers, but we didn't truly believe. She shook her head, reaching for Alan's hand. Oh, Callum, I'm so sorry. Rayla. She held them off to give us time. He looked to where the others were strapping on their armor, checking their weapons, Eferi inspecting Ranan's prosthetic. We need to go back for her, but I can't take Xiao. No, of course not. Luyan shook her head. I'll reset the illusions along the path. Seal this place off. Thank you. Callum squeezed her shoulder. Can you conceal Xiao as well? Make her appear human. Yes, yes. Luyan turned back to the table. Yes, of course. I should have thought of that. She's got pinkos, which is helpful. Callum nodded, turning back to the room. Everyone seemed ready. Eferi was crouching down by Xiao, smiling at her and speaking softly. Callum felt his heart breaking anew. He desperately did not want to leave Xiao behind, to not know if she was safe, but he couldn't bring her with him and he had to save Rayla. Taking a deep breath, he approached his daughter, smiling gratefully at Eferi when he got up and gave him space. Xiao. Callum took her little hands, as he crouched down beside her. I'm going to go back with Nanny and Grandad and Eferi and Ranan to get your mama. He took a deep breath. But I need you to stay here and look after Nanny and Grandad's house with Luyan and Alan, okay? Xiao's big eyes filled with tears and she slid from her chair to throw her arms around his neck. No, Dada. Don't go too. I'll be back so soon, sweetie. Callum tried to reassure her. With your mom, okay? She's going to be so excited to see you. He leaned back, putting his hands on her little shoulders. And you and Luyan are going to play a game and you can show Mama when I bring her to see you. A game. Xiao sniffed, wiping her nose. Yep. Callum got to his feet, stepping back to let Luyan approach Xiao. The moon mage scrawled the runes before Xiao, speaking the trigger words and pausing as the spell took hold. A bright light enveloped Xiao, and she giggled as her skin glowed. A moment later his daughter was replaced with a slightly disconcerting human version of her. Gone was her pale bluish-toned skin, replaced with an olive color that more resembled his own. Her eyes remained her natural dark hazel, but her curly hair was now a matching chestnut brown, a little wilder where it concealed her stubby little horns. With no markings on her cheeks, her face looked more rounded, a little younger, and he took a deep breath to steady himself. She looked like his Xiao, but not his Xiao. Anyone who knew her well might have caught the resemblance, but it wasn't immediately obvious at first glance. Hopefully, if worst came to absolute worst, this illusion would be enough to keep her safe, even if he could not. Oh, very fun. He forced a smile, crouching down again to embrace her. I'll be back soon. Me and your mom, okay? Okay. Xiao's voice was high and squeaky, not far off a wail. I love you in the whole world, Dada. I love you in the whole world too, Xiao. Callum felt tears sting his own eyes. He wanted to hold her forever, and he wanted to go rescue Rayla. The conflict almost made him dizzy. Forcing himself, he let Xiao go, getting to his feet and joining Rayla's parents as they prepared to go rescue her. Rayla tried to appear defeated as she watched the humans guarding her. They had initially seemed normal enough, but as the day had gone on, whatever illusions they wore began to slip and fade, and even in the dim evening light, she could see their skin was grey and discolored, hints of white in their hair. One of them was dressed in the armor of the Catolian army and her face was somewhat familiar, though Rayla couldn't exactly place her right now. Her memories were hazy anyway, snippets of whatever horrible illusions Claudia was subjecting her to pressing upon her mind, confusing her. She closed her eyes, pushing those thoughts away, and tried to think of Callum and Xiao. Hopefully they were safe now, far away in the moon nexus, at the very least. Well, Xiao would be at least. She knew Callum though, she knew it was unlikely he was going to stay there. Knowing him, he was already rallying her parents to help rescue her. She didn't want them coming here. It was too dangerous for all of them. And they needed to be together to protect Xiao, to get her as far from these dark mags as possible. She needed to escape this place, somehow find Callum and her parents on the road and go back to Xiao. Glancing at the humans guarding her once again, she hoped her movements were slight enough not to draw their attention. She was better at picking locks than working her way out of ropes, but given time, she could work her way free. It might require breaking one of her thumbs, but she could manage with one hand. She had before. The door opened and her guards stood to attention as Claudia, Terry and an older man entered. You're not making any progress with her, the older man said, his face contorted in a sneer. This is a waste of time. We can use her for far more than information. Rayla's stomach twisted at these words, but she tried desperately to look unaffected. She hung her head lower, as she tried to watch them from behind the veil of her hair. That would be a mistake. Claudia crossed her arms over her chest. We needed the Hymage, not this useless elf. The man glared at Rayla for a moment. She's a waste of time and energy. Harvest her now and add her to our reserves. We can go after him once it's done. It'll be